So welcome again. First of all, thank you, fellow board members, for coming out this evening to this important work session that is intended to help us, the board, on governance practices we can follow to move. We formally met to discuss how we would like to during our board development session. Out of that meeting was determined that several actions needed to be undertaken by the board in coordination with our CEO to advance the organization. These actions, and I won't hit them all, but I do believe we all came to the conclusion in prior sessions to see the action list that was put together for reference and suitably affect current discussions and decision-making. Determine this board's strategic agenda of important issues that need to be understood, framed, and strategized, in particular for 2014 through 2016. Establish an annual calendar for strategic plan review. Create policy on official spokesperson, proper communications of board members, and issues regarding messaging. Organize a board training and communicating effectively. Develop a future leaders mentoring program. Determine ways better to use former board members to the advantage of the current board, better decision making, better communications. Seek diversity on the board of directors. Re-articulate the board's policies and charges to all advisory committees, revising for clarity or alignment with strategic direction as necessary, and emphasizing A, proper communications, the process and methods to advance recommendations to the board, i.e. a flow chart, and C, proper staff support or their autonomous decision-making authority in general, clarify who's got what authority. Revisit the need for current advisory committees restructuring where needed. Revise and review and use new board meeting practices. Provide board members with a staff organization chart. And lastly, form a governance committee that will develop a final board development action plan for 2014 through 2015. So with that, over the past several months, I've been working with Ellen, our vice chair, Kate, our CEO, and the board planning committee, which is composed of Mike, John, Eve, and Jeff, to put together an outline for the board governance committee and a restated purpose for the board planning committee. It is important that we establish these board committees correctly and with input from everyone on the board with the goal of improving our governance process. After the July 31st board meeting, it was clear to me that we needed the expert guidance from our BoardSource consultant, Bruce Leslie. That is why I've directed Kate to contact him and set up this work session this evening. And just to remind everybody who Bruce is, Bruce has been in this business for quite some time. He has over 38 years of nonprofit leadership and management experience. He currently is the senior governance consultant with BoardSource, planning, innovation, and board development, and previously as a staff professional with Junior Achievement, where from 1989 through 1991, he was National Executive Vice President of its headquarters operations. BoardSource has been working with nonprofit organizations and associated institutions for quite some time. And their client list and some of Bruce's work are to be noted. I won't read them all, but some to be noted are Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Education Association, the Stanford Center for Social Innovation, the Green Gorillas, the National Wildlife Federation headquarters here, the League of Minnesota Cities, the National League of Cities, the Reston Interfaith, now Cornerstones, as well as the Armed Services YMCA, and the Roadrunners Clubs of America. So I think we have the expertise in hand. I look forward to a very productive session. I remind you that I don't know if everybody remembers at our May 23rd session the use of these cards where we would work on matters that were of declarative nature in general to use the green card if we felt that it was something that we felt comfortable with or approved, as well as the red card that would obviously disapprove or give the ancillary no, not really in favor of that kind of an approach or that thought. So again, anytime you feel like you have to make a comment, please, let's use the cards. Let's keep some decorum here so we can keep this productive and stay on agenda. Lastly, one thing that was reminded me, Bruce, it is important to note that you have lived in the Reston area for the last 18 years. So you are familiar with Reston, all of the ins and outs, and all of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So thank you and welcome, and it's your time to start things going here.
Ken, member comments, I believe.
Oh, I apologize. That is the most important part of the agenda as well. Let's see, I do have a few here for individuals that were unable to attend because it is a holy day. So let me find that document out of all my paperwork. And I'll read those comments into the record. Here they are.
Is that for tomorrow that you received, or did you receive something for today?
No, I thought I did receive something. I take that back. So
Tomorrow night.
I do have from those that have signed up, I'm looking at the list, Mr. Dennis Hayes.
Thank you very much. Dennis Hayes, 20-plus year Reston resident, currently with the Reston Citizens Association. I appreciate all the work that everybody did. I did have an opportunity to read through, I think, most of the material that was presented, and I congratulate BoardSource and others for giving a full discussion of the various issues that are out there. You are our elected representatives, and we look to you for leadership in a lot of different fields. But I think you have to make it easy for us to be able to support you in all the things that you do. And in reading through the materials, I was struck that there were a couple of the traits that were talked about in terms of what exceptional boards do. And it came down to transparency and to integrity. And so I'm going to limit my remarks to item 6 on your agenda, which is the question of an ethics committee. And very strongly urge that you take a serious look at this and that you form an independent ethics committee, not an advisory committee, but an ethics committee. And please include outside members, individual members of the community who have something to contribute to this area. You're a very large organization. You have a very large budget. You do a lot of good things. I think that this is an important part of being an organization, is to making clear that these things are done in a proper manner. And so I strongly urge you to continue that. Now, I had some comments on other parts of that, but my experience is that nobody listens after the first point that anybody makes. So I'm going to save that for maybe some of the other folks out here to make. But please, a separate ethics committee with independent members.
I have a question.
Yes.
So when you recommend the ethics committee,
Yes.
Who are you envisioning on being in that committee?
I think, my experience on boards over the years and everything, I would expect 2 or 3 members of your board, and then perhaps, a slightly smaller number. If you have 3 board members, maybe 2 independent people, an attorney or someone who has a tradition or experience in this area. I think it would be very helpful and would help you in your work.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next is Sridhar.
Yeah. Hi, good evening. Thank you again for facilitating this meeting and for putting this together. Sridhar Ganesan, 16-year resident of Reston. I know many of you, and for those that don't know me, I'm also the president of Reston Citizens Association. I have reviewed many of the documents. I've provided some feedback to some of you. I won't take up a lot of time because I really want to hear what the board thinks, and as well as actually listen to what Bruce has to say and how this moves forward. But the important thing, I think I'm getting a lot of questions. I'm getting a lot of email messages, responses from the public, not just from within RCA, but from the general public as well. And there is a lot of concern as to, what this governance committee really means. There's some confusion about the language, in this document, for instance, and then as well as today's agenda, the questions in today's agenda, and generally sprinkled throughout the, the presentations and the documents as to what really is the intent. People are worried that this governance committee is going to actually pick a slate of candidates that restricted field that the people will have to vote upon. Second matter of concern is this committee is going to have all the power to actually appoint officers to to the board on an annual basis without the full participation of the board or allowing everybody to have an opportunity to actually run for those positions. So there's some concerns, a lot of concern about that, which is what you've probably seen in many of the public comments with respect to concentration of power, and based on those assumptions, there's a lot of questions about, this is not really democratic, and so I think it is very, very important that, RA and the board addresses these concerns, puts out, really good, very clear, open communication that addresses in very, very simple, plain language, right? Categorically asserts that, the intent of this is not that. If in fact it is not that. Going back to the ethics questions, I think there's probably a need to strengthen the ethics and code of conduct, compliance, the policies, processes around that, who it reports to, right? I know there is a proposal to, or at least there's a question that this should report to the governance committee. Maybe I would suggest that, think about it in a very open fashion, because if the governance committee is going to have certain powers, then we should probably think about splitting. Typically, it's in an audit committee, but I don't think you have an audit committee. But if you don't have that, I would really urge that it be an independent body, right? Or at least have a substantial independent composition to that. And so that's all I have to say on this. I do have more feedback, but I want to listen to this first and then email the board.
I had a question. Yes, you had mentioned that you wanted to see more democratic. I didn't quite catch that.
Okay, I think there is a lot of confusion in the community that the governance committee is going to have the power to basically cherry pick people, right? And I understand that is not the case. I don't necessarily read all the language as that, but there is some, confusion in that regard. And what I'm suggesting or requesting is that there be clear communication that it's going to be an open democratic process, not only for the board, but also for the officers.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, that was the list of those that had taken the time to sign up. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to make a comment? This would be the opportunity. All right. Then I'm sorry. Come on up, state your name and your address, and go from there.
Good evening. My name is Erwin Flashman. I live at 1327 Buttermilk Lane, Weston. And I wanted to make a few remarks this evening, simply to state some very basic and general principles that I think can be lights for you as you engage in your discussions. First of all, I'd like to commend you for holding this and holding it in a public way. I think that there was enough a concern expressed by members of the board at the July 31st meeting about the content of the original proposal, that it merited something of this nature, and it merits careful consideration of what you are going to do with respect to a governance committee and your planning committee. I think that the suggestion of the first speaker this evening, and which was ratified again by the second speaker, concerning a separate ethics committee independent of the governance committee, is something to be seriously considered and adopted. In general, I think that openness and full participation by all board members in making major decisions at a committee level is very important. That is not now the case and would not be the case under the proposal that was made on July 31st. There was a concentration of power in the proposal offered, and I think that is to be avoided because it does not allow for full participation of elected members. And we must remember that you are elected members by the membership. And so therefore, it is important for that membership that you be fully participatory in the decisions and the formation of the alternatives that are suggested for the board's consideration. Openness is another key. The sharing of information with the membership, the sharing of information among you, and your full participation is really important. It requires time and effort. And you will not always have the expertise that you need, and so you should feel free to call upon it. There's plenty of expertise in this community, and you should feel free to avail yourself of it, which means that you don't have to have the expertise on the board itself, that you can depend upon the electorate to come forward with their offerings in terms of candidacies for the positions on the board, and the electorate to make the proper decisions, and whatever expertise is missing, you can fill in by seeking it elsewhere. So with that, I conclude my statement. I wish you lots of luck. Sir.
Thank you.
All right. At this time, if I may, I'll introduce our facilitator this evening, Mr. Bruce Leslie.
Great.
Passing the baton over to you now, finally.
Obviously, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anyone has based on my experience in working with nonprofit boards on how they might approach or address them. But primarily, I'm here actually just to facilitate, your discussion. So Ken has asked me to help you frame the discussion so that we can kind of isolate what are those issues where we agree, where are those issues where we might have some concerns, and to raise the discussion, to that level. Second to that, literally simply to ask good questions and get out of the way and let you talk, amongst yourselves. I must say, of all the boards I've worked with, you are the very first one now to have read your board development action plan into YouTube. So congratulate you on the transparency. I can see teenage kids all over America going to the site and wanting to know what the rest of the association is doing. As we look forward, and again, Ken and I have talked about this, I'm going to assume that his original motion is kind of the cornerstone for the discussion. And then where we had agreement or disagreement from the motion to substitute, or from a subsequent email, or from the comments that we've heard, from the podium, then we'll raise those again for, whole group discussion. So as we think about, moving forward, I'm going to ask our AV person to figure out how I can advance this slide using this tool, please. But as we move forward through today's agenda, first and foremost, I thought we could focus on areas we actually have common agreement, where there weren't, a lot of changes, throughout. Second to that, there are about 4 major areas, including the comments about the ethics committee, that there may be some kind of philosophical debate on one level, and then we'll see how we can translate that into an actionable, idea for the motion itself. And then finally, in the third piece of the puzzle, or at the end of the puzzle, I think we have a lot of opportunity to talk about process, talk about how you as a group want to create a culture of decision-making, amongst yourselves as you move forward, and how as a process you handle these types of discussions. So is that fair? So you have red and green cards in front of you, and I'm going to use them periodically. Could you find them, please? So in general, this agenda flow should serve our purpose. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Great, we can move forward. This is where we always start, and this is where we started out in the May retreat when I completed telephone interviews with all of you in advance. Actually, Kate and I talked, I was going to talk to 2 or 3 of you to get a sense of what happened, and then someone said, well, you ought to call this person and that person. I ended up talking to each and every one of you. So you've actually had a 4-hour meeting in advance of, this meeting itself. But sometimes our conversation would kind of get off a little tangent into why you joined the board in the first place, or what you wanted to accomplish, as a member of the board. And it always came back to this as the core, trying to make Reston a better place to live in, back to the vision, back to the mission, back to, the values of the association. So I just want to throw that up in front of everyone, as a starting point. And then secondly, before we get involved, some of the comments that I heard, and I actually viewed the video from your meeting, at least the 45 minutes that were focused, on this discussion, and researched some other types of neighborhood associations and some other information. But these are some general themes that we might keep in mind as we think about committees in general, as we move forward. So first and foremost, a board of directors like yours only forms committees to help you as a board do your job. Rarely do you delegate final authority to any individual committee. And so I think we have to be careful about the language that we use in setting up the charter so that that's clear. But the assumption is, unless it states otherwise, the assumption is that a committee only brings back recommendations to the full board. The committee only brings back ideas to the full board, unless it's written otherwise. So that's a piece of the puzzle. Second to that is that in no way are committees supposed to be marginalizing, but rather it's kind of all about spreading the workload. And one of the things that I heard from a number of you is that the planning committee, quite honestly, has too much stuff to do. And there's just too much on its agenda. So we might be able to use the governance committee to spread the workload, throughout. So that's another, piece of the puzzle throughout. Third to that, you're very, very unique because of Virginia law. You have open meetings, not only open board meetings for your members to attend, but open work sessions, open committee meetings, et cetera, et cetera. So technically, every single one of you as a board member sees everything that's going to the planning committee or is going to the fiduciary committee or eventually will be going to the governance committee. Every one of you as a board member has an opportunity to attend any of those committees. And from what I've heard, Ken, what you mentioned, normally you're able to sit at the table and have voice, in that discussion. So none of the work that I think you are creating for committees is meant to close out anyone's, voice, per se. Fourth to that, someone mentioned a situation where a conflict of interest might arise because of who had been assigned to what committee, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to mention that that's going to come up, be it as a board or otherwise, and you follow your normal conflict of interest policy. And any individual who has a conflict at a committee level goes through the process to recuse themselves the same way they would if they had a conflict at a board level, discussion, etc. The fifth point then is that many times, Ken, you as president and Kate as chief executive are ex officio on all committees, just from a point of administration and maintenance. In fact, I think Robert's rules automatically makes the president of an association an ex officio member, of all individual committees. And what you have to decide when that occurs is whether or not an ex officio member has a vote or no vote. And you do need to be explicit about that when you charge a committee, because ex officio doesn't automatically mean yes or no in terms of vote or no vote throughout. We talk about micromanagement, I think back in July in terms of the board's relationship to staff, but I've been in meetings before where all of a sudden this term micro-governing arose. And even one of the comments, one of the emails I read from one of your members right in was saying, well, you do this and you do this, why do you have to decide this? Why not let the committee? I think it was an email that said, why not let the committee make decisions on their own chair and vice chair, elect among themselves? Well, again, there's a threshold somewhere, but we have to be careful not to, quote, micro-govern or direct committees too tightly, throughout. And then finally, I think what you're doing here tonight and what we started back in the retreat is to periodically assess the performance of committees, periodically zero base and discuss which are still needed and how might we adjust and change to become a better board of directors. So that's just kind of some background information on committees. Any comments or thoughts on this and or any other kind of assumptive comments like we heard from your members to get us started? Any other baseline comments?
I have a comment on your open meetings allows all directors. Not only do we allow all directors, we allow all of the RA members to attend. It's open to everyone.
Absolutely.
I think that's very important.
Technically, this motion, you saw this 3 times before the meeting that I viewed, on YouTube. And again, not that we're all not busy. Don't get me wrong, but there is access. There is transparency. I think Dennis is one of the points that you raised. There is access to that information.
The problem is that even with
all the meetings on this particular motion, we never had the opportunity to discuss it.
Absolutely.
That's been a
Absolutely.
real point of frustration. There's been no opportunity for us as a board to collaborate on it because it was, derailed so quickly.
And again, that might have been able to happen through an official motion, but you may come up with another process. When I was working with the Resident Interfaith Board, back when they were called Resident Interfaith a number of years back, they made a decision to discuss an issue meeting A, but not vote on it until the next meeting, so that people had, time and the process change that comes out of this throughout. So, Eve, you're right. Robert's Rules allows for debate and discussion, but you got so quickly into an amendment for substitution, and over here there was an amendment to table, and you got so quickly into that literally the 45 minutes you spent was on more administrative things and not on the philosophical debate, which is very, very important. Yes, Lucinda?
I would like to clarify that the open meetings, it allows the public and all of the directors to observe what is going on in the open meeting part. However, it's not, like, they take comments at the beginning, but there's not a discussion. It's the committee having the discussion and making the decision. People aren't allowed to just jump in and out. It's like one of the board meetings. So it's not allowing input as far as it's being represented.
So you could have input at the very beginning of the meeting per what we saw from some of your members today, but you're saying that it's not open in terms of the discussion around the table. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So, but again, Lucinda, think about that, because that's not necessarily the way it has to be. You could, I know boards that have open committee meetings open for voice of all directors who want to show up and attend. And so you could change that if you so choose.
Also, I know that some board members meet separately as subcommittees and things that I don't even know what they're meeting about or when they're meeting. So I'm not able to attend those meetings and hear the information there.
Yeah, Ken, that's not technically,
I'm not sure what.
Yeah, could you give us an example of that?
Well, Ken and Ellen have monthly breakfasts with Kate. I don't know what the meetings are for. The other night when I was coming to a meeting, I saw Kellen and Ellen, and I think maybe Jeff. I saw 3 or 4 board members walking down the hall out of the meeting room. So I know that board members are meeting, but I don't know what they're meeting about, and I'm not able to have any input. So there are some instances where board members are not able to have input.
yeah. So again, there may be a need, if that does occur, for greater transparency. Can meeting by meeting, you might ask that. I don't think technically that you intend that to happen. There might be times when an officer or an officer team is meeting with staff to get work done or help staff interpret policy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's a difference between Ken and Kate meeting in a staff capacity than having a meeting. I mean, I think those are 2 very different things. But I mean, I don't think that's.
But again, Ken, you're open to consideration and
Open
feedback.
to anything.
It's very possible that following the retreat, Ken, you might have set up a task force of you and Ellen to draft the First Amendment, and it'd be open.
If the board, even the membership, they're concerned about my meeting with Kate, we'll have open meetings. I don't mean to be facetious, but there is a point of where just having to deal with the day-to-day operations, I have to meet with staff, Kate, or whomever, to deal with staff-related issues. But definitely very open-minded. If we need to change the fact that somebody feels excluded or something like, I don't want that to be the case.
It's appropriate, I think, to interject here. Let's all understand status quo rules.
Yeah.
So if you want to make a change, and again, we kind of getting a little off topic, but if you want to change the way the group operates together, then you need to come back with a substantive proposal or go back through your own policies and find the sentence or clause and offer up an amendment, a change,
Absolutely
to that otherwise. So, but I don't think there's any ill intent to what
I don't
suggesting,
either,
Lucinda.
and I don't need to be at every single meeting.
And I think the intention is for most of the work to be done through committees and subcommittees in an open, transparent fashion.
Agreed.
Okay. Anything else? Any other kind of? Yes, go ahead, Rachel.
Excuse me. I have a question, and
Well, there's,
I think intentions are well and good, but unless you design a process and structure to make those intentions become apparent and result in something that you intended, when you hear comments like Lucinda's, I'd be worried.
Thank you. Rachel?
I'd like to utilize your expertise with so many different kinds of organizations. There you've done work with corporate entities, you've done work with NGOs, and maybe some government organizations. I have the sense that, and from reading the documents that are the basis of RA, that in some ways we're unique. And from both the experience you've had with working other entities and your time here in Reston, I'm asking this question because there will be comparisons made to these other organizations in regards to their structure. Let's say a corporate structure or an NGO structure. And the degree to which we are unique, in which our responsibilities, and particularly because we're elected officials for the community, does that make us different from many of the comparisons that you've had experience with in the past?
I actually only work with nonprofit organizations.
Okay.
I've never worked with a corporation or for-profit. I've never been in a for-profit owner.
I see.
I do not work with government organizations. NEA is the closest, and they're obviously a separate nonprofit union. So all of my experience is in the nonprofit sector. I have a colleague that says, when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. So I can get every group I've ever worked with to say we're different, we're unique, et cetera. I think when I looked at what experiences I might have that are relevant to you as an organization, the only way to do that in the type of work I do is to break down break you down into components. So if you ask me, how do boards who act under state law and open meeting rules, how do they operate? I could probably pull 3 or 4 examples. If you ask me, about organizations who are heavy into democratic, values and, member voting, how do they act? So you're different, obviously, as an organization. And again, I'm not trying to draw any comparisons. I'm just here to facilitate, and it's really up to you. Unfortunately, there isn't a lot of in-depth research on homeowners association. I reviewed your trade association materials. I reviewed the foundation for neighborhood homeowners, and there's just not a lot, out there for comparison. So.
And I appreciate you looking at that. I think that the distinctions maybe between those other types of organizations and our own may be part of our discussion. Yeah, I hope it will be.
And again, you have your own experiences with the Columbia Association or other, groups that you might be familiar with. Any other final comments before we keep moving? Okay. First piece of the puzzle then, we're going to move into, board knowledge. Forget the part here that's underlined. The concept that one of the responsibilities of the governance committee would be to, quote, design and oversee a process to orient new directors ending after the first cycle of board activity. So let's just focus on that. I mean, that seemed to have a majority agreement on, how it was. I think that I've noted down here that there was some substitute, wording. But again, I argue that we want to kind of stay up on the big philosophical, differences and not wordsmith unless there's a major, intention change here. So in general, any comments in favor or against, Richard?
Yeah, I would just say that I think that's a perfectly legitimate statement. If you add design and oversee a process to orient new, potential or new directors.
Okay.
Okay. There is already a process in place to orient declared candidates. There's an orientation session that's run by the elections committee, and I think that that's an excellent tool to educate people. One could say that taking that back even further to before someone declares for a candidate would also be beneficial. And expanding on that after a director is elected would also be beneficial. So in my mind, I look at it in three ways. I look at it as what can we do to educate, mentor, whatever word you want to use, prior to the election cycle, to engage people who might be interested in at some point serving on the board. The next step would be a similar or somewhat different program for the declared candidates, much like we have today. And then third is what a number of us have asked for over the years, is a more robust process after a director is elected to bring them up to speed on, our processes, our policies, hot issues, those kinds of things. Although we expect the candidates that are elected to be up to speed, the reality is they're not always.
Okay.
So that's,
So
I kind of look at that all as in part of that one statement.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Rich, I think that's, as being a new member, I think looking at prisms is really valuable, because I think when you have some type of program where people who are thinking about running for the board can kind of get a better idea of what is it really about, what is the time commitment, what are the rules, they can get familiar, because then they can make more of an informed decision. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and run and give a shot at it. Then you give a little bit more information. Okay, this is what I mean. Here's the election process. Got to be sure you follow these rules. And here's a little bit more about the operation of the board and things like that. And then once you get on the board, then you get the lawyers in the room and you do all that type of stuff. So I think that idea of having an orientation process for people who may be interested, people who are running, and then new members, I think that's a nice model. Rachel?
I think we all agree to the merits of that kind of process. I think the question is, who has the responsibility for that? In the past, it's been the Elections Committee, and it is offered here as a duty for the Governance Committee. And most of us all agree in principle that that's a good idea. I think it's where the responsibility would lie is the question before us, and maybe the source of differences.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. Maybe there's you can make the distinction, because I think it's probably proper for the Governance Committee to kind of design what that program looks like, but then the execution of it perhaps gets put to the Elections Committee, especially on the front end, certainly.
That's basically how it works today, is that, is that the Elections Committee periodically critiques the session. That orientation session has evolved over the years and gotten, from where it first started to now is much better, much more comprehensive. It's, for the candidates, it's staff that is providing that information, so it's executed by the staff.
Right.
But I think the idea of a governance committee providing structure to, what is going on, but it's going to vary. It's going to vary from year to year in terms of what's going on, what are the hot buttons, those kinds of things. So the curriculum is going to have to be, modified as we go along.
I mean, clearly it's in that first year where new board members, I think, pretty commonly, without understanding clearly the process, will, or especially if they've come up through the committees, it's a different role that you're playing, and that's where I think board members tend to get sideways. They're used to being able to interact with committees in a certain way. They're used to be able to interact with staff in a certain way, and that's just not available to board members, really. I mean, not if we want staff to work in an effective way, So.
Okay. So, Rachel, again, the word oversee could still allow the election committee the implementation, staff, someone mentioned, does a lot of implementation on orientation. So right now what we might be sitting on is a proposal to, quote, design and oversee a process to orient potential and new directors.
Are we saying that we're taking that responsibility away from the entire board and giving it to?
No.
Oh.
No. I mean, again, The committee is going to design and oversee. The committee is always accountable back to the full board of directors. The full board of directors can say, we don't like what you're doing as a committee, and charge the committee to adjust, change, etc. Committees are reporting back saying, here's what we did, and here are the results, and here's how it's working. Throughout.
Wait, so what does the oversee mean?
To provide oversight to make sure that the implementation occurs. So oversee or oversight would parallel to ensure that implementation occurs, be it through staff, be it through the election committee, be it through themselves, in some cases, be it through inviting other board members to be involved in. Maybe your orientation design process becomes a one-on-one where directors become mentors to, people who are interested and have a 13-slide PowerPoint that they go one-on-one. I don't know what the answer to the question is, but oversight would be to ensure implementation. Yes, go ahead, Daniel.
This might just be a language thing, but when I first read it, starting prior to his or her election, it seemed to me that someone was already selected to be.
Well,
it just seemed like it was.
I want you to forget this phrase for right now, because later on, you're absolutely right. I underlined it on purpose, because later on we're going to come back to the question, which is a bigger question, of how active or involved should you be in encouraging people and how, so I apologize, but that, I didn't want to delete things per se and have Ken get upset at me, so I underlined those things.
As it's been described, it sounds great,
okay.
And I would personally like to see it and receive some mentors. So
there you go. So you're the first experiment.
Coffee.
Great.
And I've already.
Yes, go ahead.
A brief clarification. My idea of oversight on the part of the RA board or a governance board and this process having to do with the election cycle would be one of, as a resource, not necessarily oversight, but as a resource that the elections committee could draw upon and could utilize in helping to educate prospective members and to educate the public. For us to be ambassadors to the community as a whole and encourage participation in RA, but not to specifically, the right word, to try and select or try and guide.
Yeah, let's not confuse things. This has nothing to do with guiding, selecting. I'm trying to, Daniel, you're right, and I apologize for not clarifying this. I'm taking the starting prior to his or her election out for right now. I mean, right now the statement on the table is, quote, design and oversee a process to orient potential and new directors, period. And so, again, it's the governance committee to ensure that that happens, that you're adequately oriented and up to speed, as you come in.
I'm sorry, backing up to kind of the big picture, I know we were going to talk about what we're agreeing on, but I don't understand what we're agreeing on. Are we agreeing that this is something that the board governance committee would do, or are we just agreeing that this is a good statement? Because no. I agree with this statement. I think everybody.
This comes directly out of the motion. It's C, board knowledge, item 1. So it's in your motion material. So everything I'm putting up here, I didn't make this stuff up. This is all out of the original motion, and the material you'll see in blue is from Rachel's, amendment to substitute throughout. So again, this is what we're going through are the individual charges to a potential governance committee, as we move forward, throughout.
I just want to make sure what I said is clear. We have 3 processes: mentoring or educating potential candidates. We have mentoring or educating candidates, and then we have the mentoring of new directors. The elections committee does not do number 1, and does not currently, nor does their charter say that they would do number 1, nor does it say that they would do number 2. They manage the elections and the process that goes on through the election cycle. So the governance committee, if this were to fall to the governance committee, would have to, my assumption is that the governance committee would say, okay, we have decided to do the phase 1 piece. Who's best prepared to do that? Okay, and define, give guidance in terms of what that content should be, what that process should be, what that should look like. We could sit here for all day and design that right now, but we're not gonna do that. Same on the back end.
And again, let's keep in mind, you have to be mobile, flexible, you know, as a group. I mean, you can't come up with language that'll take care of everything. You're going to come up with language as a starting point, and maybe 6 months from now, someone says, wow, we weren't clear enough on this point. Now that we see it working, we need to adjust and modify it. But we're trying to get kind of the basic language down, because if we don't get through this tonight, you got no governance committee. You have an overworked planning committee, you know, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't resolved concentration of power. We haven't resolved, you know, these other things, you know, throughout. So we're on point 1 of a few additional points. Fortunately, I TiVo'd Modern Family and Blackgate, so don't worry about me. Lucinda?
Okay, so I think we all agree that this action needs to happen, and I guess we're going to decide about how the committees are, the composition and leadership of the committees later.
It's on the agenda later,
Right.
yes.
Okay, so I don't understand why we're giving ourselves more work when we're saying we want less because we're overwhelmed. Like, the election committee does this. I think they do a pretty good job of it, and we can always give them input to do a better job of it. Like, why are we going to have 2 committees doing the same thing, and why not just use what we have for this?
So you're
for this
saying that
task?
the election committee currently provides Danielle with orientation?
Yeah.
And how's that going, Danielle? Tell us
I don't
what
know.
tell us
I
what
haven't
you've
met an
received from the election committee.
No, she got the orientation from Ken and Kate, right?
Well, let's let her tell us.
Oh,
Danielle?
Yeah, I got put in the room with the lawyer. And
Poor Ken.
I said it with love.
and then have sent emails out, and you know, trying to schedule meetings with people. And everyone has been very receptive, and it's just a matter of doing that. But again, if I wasn't sending emails out, I think 1 or 2 of you have, you know, contacted me, and I appreciate that. If I hadn't sent that out, I wouldn't have heard. And I'm not sure if that's a normal process or if I was appointed and you guys were like,
Okay.
just sit there.
Ken,
Right. Exactly.
2 points. 1, I'm not ignoring anyone that raised their hand. I'm not authorized to call on anyone except to facilitate people around this table. So Ken, you need to monitor or watch hands over there. And the second to you, Ken, where do you think we are with this? Because, Lucinda, some people believe that it would be a very valuable responsibility for the governance committee.
I think I would hope that we would agree with the intent, knowing that much of the orientation is actually done by the board and staff, not the elections committee. As Richard stated, the elections committee, by and far, is responsible for the implementation and the conclusion of the elections process.
Okay.
They don't focus a lot of their attention on the orientation. They may give the rules of how the election works, when you need to submit documentation, etc. But in terms of understanding what life on the board is like, that's not their charter.
So let me try a straw vote, just because I brought these and I spent a lot of time printing them up and everything. So, and I'm paraphrasing out loud, so you have to listen to the paraphrase statement. So right now, and Richard, I'm using the word potential to include the first 2 categories and new. So, quote, 1 responsibility of the new governance committee would be to design and oversee a process to orient potential and new directors, period. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Wait. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. Potential?
Let the record show it's 7 o'clock.
Are we having notifications like we said?
Folks, I need to manage we would like to get through the workshop, so please, I'll certainly take 1 or 2 questions, but if I see that it's being taken over by the audience, and I would readdress this whole work session. So please, who had their hand up, and I'll address it. Yes, sir.
I understand that somebody at the RA level should have a role in orienting new directors. I don't see what role there can be to orient potential directors unless you want to pick potential directors, which I don't see as a valid role for RA.
Again, that's not the case. The intention is to say to everyone here, everyone out there, Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're ever interested
Go
in
here.
maybe being a member of the RA Board of Directors, come to this workshop, come to this seminar, hear about what the board's all about. That's the only thing that this statement says. It has nothing to do, and there's no ill intention here. It's just about making sure that people know prior to even thinking about running, what's the possibility, what are the options through it.
But the context for this was based on a role for the governance committee to try to seek new directors.
No, it's not. I apologize, but each one of these statements and responsibilities stands alone. So you're going to definitely disagree down in D or E as we get into it. But, I think we have to keep moving forward. And then when we get to the direct point, that'll be debated by the board itself. Michael and then Lucinda.
Two things. Number one, really appreciate the audience being here and whatnot. And a question I've got from my peers on the board, how best might we accommodate the audience? Do we want to have a certain time during the board discussion to bring comments together? I think that we need to resolve that. The second item is it would really be helpful if someone from the audience does speak, just to identify who they are so that we all know who's speaking.
Lucinda, final comment. We had green votes. I'm going to move forward.
Oh, we took out the prior, right? We took out that underlined part.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yes, we did. Okay. Second point then, under this responsibility, design and implement an ongoing program of board information and education. Again, Ken, if I can paraphrase and you can correct me, but the intention then is to have a committee that ensures that the sitting board members are constantly oriented on best practices, new things that are happening. You could bring in a panel from other homeowner association directors from time to time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in general, design and implement an ongoing program of board information and information. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Okay, great. John, we're on item number 2, so you haven't missed a lot.
I think I'd rather look before I vote. That's unusual, I know.
Board role and effectiveness. Again, I'm trying to find those pieces of the puzzle where there seem to be some common agreement, to move through, and then we'll move into areas where we actually disagree on some areas. So, lead the board in regularly reviewing and updating the board's statement of its roles and areas of responsibilities and the expectations of individual members. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Okay, Lucinda and Richard, are you okay with this item? Lucinda, are you okay?
Hold on.
Okay.
Sorry.
D1.
Well, I don't, isn't that a planning thing? Is that planning?
This, I tried to code everything for my simple statement. When something was moved over from planning, I've got like an orange BPC in there, so I do not believe this was transferred from the planning committee now.
Okay.
Okay, great. D2, lead the periodic assessment of the board's performance, effectiveness, and ongoing measures of performance. That was actually part of your board development, work plan that you've already approved. So tend to agree, tend to disagree?
I just think that those are planning things. Am I wrong?
You see the green cards around the table, don't ask me.
Can I abstain?
Yes, you can. Okay. And then there were items 3 and 4 under roles and effectiveness, which had to do with ethics, which a number of people commented on. We're going to come back to that later in the agenda. And your debate is, what do you need from an ethics standpoint, and should it be a piece of an existing committee, or should it be a standalone, opportunity? Okay, so we're still on potential areas for agreement. Lucinda, this is an area that was moved over from the board planning committee. So again, the idea here isn't, oh, someone else is already doing it. The point is the planning committee is overworked, and so we're transferring and trying to spread the workload, throughout. So except for some minor word changing, does anyone have any objection to this item?
You have to take out board.
Excuse me?
You have to take out board in that statement. The Constitution, a board committee is established by regulation, by governing documents, not by the whim of the board itself. The advisory committees, their roles and responsibilities and their composition are determined by the board. But the board committees,
Not all of the board committees are.
which I mean,
Fiscal is not named in the deed, nor is board planning committee. Only,
but you see what I'm getting at. Well, I mean, we just have to be careful as to,
if you wanted to relook at what their roles and duties are, that was just like the board advisory committee.
well,
I think
yeah,
that
but
was-
it says continuation and the addition of new, I mean, with the continuation of a document required committee, that isn't gonna happen.
So that was moved over from.
This is currently the exact wording
It's in
in
I
the board
understand.
planning.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm just saying that if it is a committee established by governing documents, there is a limit as to what we can do with that committee.
So, Ken, do you have a legal response to that?
Alternatively, if the committee came up with a decision to terminate one of the committees, they come back to the full board, make that recommendation to the full board, and then the board can decide whether or not to amend the documents.
Well, yes, you could go to a referendum to amend the documents, yeah.
So, Richard, will you allow us to go back and research your comment here and to make sure?
Yeah,
and
I
we
think
will.
it's just a minor wordsmithing issue. It's not, I mean, the intent of that statement is certainly rigid in my mind.
Okay. So, again, review the existing, if we eliminate the word board, are you eliminating the planning committee, eliminating the fiscal committee, eliminating the governance committee itself from this discussion? Is that the intention, Richard, or?
That was not my intention.
Okay, okay. So,
So leave it as is and we
Okay.
can come back to it.
okay. So, again, this is a transfer to your direct wording, and this is not carved in stone. You know, 3 weeks from now, if we find out something different, Ken, when you look this up. So I've got it noted here, and we'll research it to make sure the language is appropriate. So, tend to agree, tend to disagree?
Question first.
Yes, Rachel?
If I may. Does the movement of this responsibility from the BPC to the governance board include the responsibility of the BCP to review and recommend advisory board members? Or is
No.
that, no?
No, this is literally the exact word.
That's the
This has
only part we're
nothing to do-
voting on, as
Right,
stated.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Exactly.
for the
There's a
clarification.
subsequent item on this. So, tend to agree, tend to disagree? Great. Okay, this is under the, board and committee composition, so I think, Rachel, this is what now, you're getting towards, and there's two pieces of the puzzle. In the past, and this is a direct transfer from your current board planning committee. So in the past, the planning committee has focused on appointments, recommending to the board appointments of membership to the various advisory committees, et cetera, and then subsequent to that, appointment recommendations for the chair and the vice chair position, throughout. So comments or any, this is one of those workload. So someone in the YouTube video that I watched kind of phrased it as now you're refocusing the board planning committee like on the immediate work of the board and the governance committee on kind of a futures. Was that you, Jeff?
Yeah, that was me.
Can you express that again, please?
Yeah, I just think it makes, and I'm on the board planning committee. This is going out of my bailiwick now, okay, and I'm okay with it. I think the idea of having the board planning committee focus on the immediate actions of the board and setting priorities for the agenda and things that are of instant action that rise to action items for the board is perfect for the board planning committee. And I think moving these other things that are talking more about the ongoing structure and continuity of the organization, constituting the composition of the boards and going out and interviewing those members, I think that's a good movement for that. And they come back and bring the suggestions to the full board. So if we disagree with who they're picking on any of these, the full board can say, no, that person's not appropriate for that. But having them go through the legwork of doing the interviews and making the recommendations, I think makes good sense. And keeping it, again, looking at the continuity of operations as opposed to daily operations.
Okay, other comments or thoughts? Eve and then Richard.
Yeah, I think that that each board member also obviously has a responsibility through their own committee work, through just being ambassadors in the community, you know, to always be helping to, you know, prime that pool of potential candidates for committees and for board seats. I mean, we should always be doing that, you know. I don't have any concerns that this dilutes any of that in any way. You know, this committee has to come back to the full board and get its work blessed, just like any other committee. And it's, you know, I mean, the board is a vocal board, so I just don't see that there's a problem with this.
Okay. Richard?
Yeah, I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I think this process is broken. Okay? And I think, personally, I think that asking the governance committee to come up with a more workable approach makes a lot of sense. But the BPC is interviewing potential candidates. I think it's important that there be an interview process. The problem is that the BPC then recommends one candidate to the full board. The full board may know who the other candidates are, but they are presented in a package deal. So if you disagree with the board's recommendation, you then have to go and separate that person out, which automatically says somebody thinks there's something wrong with that person, or they wouldn't be doing that. Then we get into a discussion as to whether or not that's a personnel matter that should then go into executive session to be discussed. We don't have any of the candidates around to discuss it with them. So I just think it's broken.
So who's accountable now for the process?
The board planning committees.
Okay.
Board planning committee makes the recommendations. It does the interviews of all the candidates and then makes a selected recommendation to the full board for consideration.
Okay. And the word, Richard, what you're saying is that the wording of this implies a single candidate slate per the wording
Well,
of
it's not even a slate, okay? It's a, the candidates are not necessarily interviewed on the same night, the same day. There is no finite, if you're interested, you must apply between this window and then the BPC or whomever is going to interview them. Okay. The full board does not have the benefit of what those candidates might say in the interview process unless they have taken the initiative to attend the BPC, which some of us do. But I just think there's, in my mind, says that there's a better way to do this, a more equitable way to do this, and a more informative way to do it.
Richard, back to your original point, you may have a valid point that this needs to be reviewed, updated, improved. And for tonight's purposes, I don't think we're going to solve that.
Right, that's why I said this may be a good reason, a good thing to do for the governance.
Would the intent of having that the responsibility of the board planning committee, the board planning committee or the governance committee, take on the responsibility of reviewing and updating and promoting a workable selection and interview process?
Charging the governance committee with responsibility for recommending a process.
Okay. Okay.
For selecting
there's
candidates.
Two items on the table. One is handled in the motion to create the committee, so we could I mean, maybe we just move this forward the way it is. But the second thing, Richard, that you have, and maybe you can bring it up officially at a next board meeting, is to then charge the governance committee with coming up with a better way to do it, coming up with a process to do it.
From my perspective, I say strike this and substitute the responsibility that the governing committee will be responsible for developing a process to do this.
Okay.
But not putting, I mean, take this away completely.
So the original language earlier on was design and oversee. So design and oversee a process to cultivate and fill positions. Is that what you're talking about? No.
No, there's there's two steps. One is kind of a roles and responsibilities for the committees.
Right.
Second is a process for populating those committees.
Okay.
I just see it as two different steps. The first one we've already talked about, okay? The second one was this, essentially, and I'm saying, take this, that's the process, or that's the high-level view of the process. Strike that and charge the governance committee with coming up with that process or recommending a process to the full board for approval. And then we can have a discussion in the course of developing that process as to what works, what doesn't work, what might be better.
Okay. So you're saying design and recommend a process for this?
Yeah.
So the suggestion
basically
on the
to
table,
populate the committees.
So Richard, but you're saying to eliminate this from the board planning committee too. I mean,
yes.
You're saying technically we move it over to the governance committee first, then we put a line through it temporarily until we, the action is to develop and recommend a process.
But
administratively
is that part of that develop and recommend a process would be determining what group is going to run that process.
And administratively, okay, without staff throwing knives in my back, okay, we don't know how long it's going to take to get this governance committee up and running and fulfilling its task. So this essentially, if you leave this with the BPC, it's business as usual until the governance committee makes its recommendations and the board approves it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Does that make sense?
No.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, what I understand
But
now,
you're going to have, and what I'm saying is that you're
I
going to have
understand what you're saying. The logic of your statement is fine. I'm a little bit troubled by putting a one-time event into this kind of document.
good point.
You know, do this once and you're finished. Yeah. Well, that's what we're doing now.
So just leave this out, but take as an action to.
Yeah.
So I see what you're saying. We have to figure out how to assign that, but this is that time to do it.
And everybody just needs to remember that language stands as it is right now in the roles and responsibilities of DPC.
But what, Richard, if I understand what you're saying, is the following. A, we do not approve this currently as a charge for the governance committee, but you leave it temporarily in your mind with the planning committee, business as usual, do what they've been doing and go about it. Okay. And then, John, to use your concept on top of it, is that although not part of the motion to charge a governance committee with duties and responsibilities, but an independent charge, where you as a group would charge the governance committee to develop and recommend a process for appointment to open positions on these bodies.
There's another way to ease this, and that is you put in the language that everybody gets in their job descriptions or other duties is periodically assigned by the board, and then this can become a charge, right?
Great.
And that way you've got a more ongoing.
Okay. So every committee ought to have as its final statement something to the tune of, and other things, you know, delegated by the board from time to time. Something of that occasion. So, okay, I'll make that note as we move forward. So, Ken, are you comfortable that we're going to leave this with the board planning committee for now, and we have an independent kind of assignment to the governance committee as it's formed, and then 3-4 months from now, when they come back with a better recommendation, you may revise, the committee, the BPC work, you may charge it to, you may become part of a stand, I don't know. But anyways, once the process is developed,
I
we'll
think we
change
had
the
a little
language.
more work than we anticipated in tonight's session, but I think it was a good point.
Okay.
So, but I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I'm comfortable with it.
Are the rest of you comfortable with that? Is that Richard's comment? Okay. The final piece of the puzzle, I think, on the areas of agreement, again, move the CEO evaluation simply as a workload from the board planning committee over to the governance committee. So again, the language of these is pretty similar. It's just moving it over to the governance committee. And again, step back into the comments that I heard on YouTube. If you designate Kate as CEO, as an ex officio member of all committees or this committee, et cetera, when they're talking about her performance review, she walks out of the room. She recuses herself because of the conflict of interest. Richard?
I think there's an issue with this piece that is impacted by the composition of the committee.
Okay. So let's all agree that if we don't end up with agreement on the composition, a consensus on the composition of the committee, you don't have the right people in the room, you might have to go back and revisit.
But let me ask the question,
okay,
distinguished counsel. If the governance committee was comprised of non-board members, one or more, how does this get impacted?
Evaluation.
Yeah, or review contractual, legal, or operational issues.
Unless there are objective, verifiable kinds of things they could consider, they would not be in a position to really fully understand exactly how she functions right at work, carrying out your duties or your assigned duties.
Are there any confidentiality?
There are.
Okay, so if we were to go to having outside participants, we probably would have to address that issue.
Probably.
So you might have to ask them to recuse themselves during this piece of the puzzle. Is that what you're getting at, Richard?
Well, I guess, and again, we'll get into, and we're talking about composition, but I'm not sure if we were going to go in the direction of a greater independence on the governance committee, okay, then the ability of that committee to truly evaluate the CEO is compromised, okay? So whether or not this role should stay with the governance committee or should go somewhere else, stay with the BPC or go somewhere else, I think is worthy of discussion.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts? Yes, go ahead.
So the way that this reads is that this committee conducts the evaluation. So that means that the rest of the board members aren't involved in the evaluation?
Not necessarily.
But that's pretty much the way it's been done in recent history.
Oh.
Yeah, again, from a best practice standpoint, BoardSource recommends that all board members be involved in the discussion. But someone's got to lead it. Someone's got to initiate, and take charge.
So we could change conduct to lead or something? Because the entire board would be conducting, right? Is that?
I mean, that's part of the issue, is that we don't have a consistent process that's been followed for more than a year. The process has essentially changed every year that I've been in the loop, okay? And, we have argued during the CEO selection process, that committee reiterated we need to have, it's only fair to the CEO and to the board to have a defined process for evaluation, which means you start with setting objectives and then you judge performance and so forth. Well, that has never really been codified and carried out from year to year. I think we need to do that. Now, whether or not, and I think, again, the issue of whether this is a one-time action by the governance committee. Okay, I think having the governance committee recommend a process as part of its other.
Richard, I think it could be done. Assuming you did go to an open, most instances you're dealing with things such as performance measures and perhaps the goals and objectives, I think, are not contractual per se. And certainly an assessment of performance is not necessarily contractual, but things such as merit, bonuses, salary, things of that nature may not be open to those individuals in that discussion. They may want to recuse themselves. It just might have to be looked at. So if perchance that the outside members would come in, non-board members, I think there might be a method to manage that process where their input would be helpful in terms of setting goals and objectives. Their input would be helpful in the ultimate performance evaluation.
I can support that.
Yeah.
Ken, isn't one of the quote board development action plan items that you read to develop a process? So again, if you, whether you leave this with the BC or move it over to the governance committee, one of those two committees is then going to be assigned the charge that you heard at the beginning of the meeting, which is to develop a better, more consistent process.
Correct.
Throughout. So, Lucinda, to your point of view, the word conduct means to implement the board's policy, whatever that board policy ends up being, and that's what you read off of the board action plan is a need to establish a policy that is consistently followed. So conduct and lead are kind of synonymous in that sense. You may still argue to change the word, but they're synonymous.
As it's written in the deed now for the CEO, the president does the evaluation, does performance review. I think every good president of wrestling association needs the input of the board, and that individual, with assistance from others, would be recommended to the board overall. Is this what we agreed to? So certainly this board would be involved in the performance goals, measures, but again, I think instead of doing it in the ad hoc fashion that we have observed over the last 2 decades, let's allow my suggestion, the governance committee, charge them with putting together a formal process that all future boards have to adhere to.
Okay. So let's assume that that's a charge, because it's already part of your board development action plan. So with that charge on the table, the question is still, do we move this, just from a workload standpoint, from the BPC? Again, this language exists, right?
No. That's
The
new.
responsibility exists or not?
That number 1 and 2 are new.
Something exists in the board planning committee, doesn't it?
Isn't it just the CEO evaluation and corporate operations? That's it.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I would somewhat agree with Lucinda in that I think that CEO evaluation and evaluation of corporate operations should be separated. And I think that the charge that we just discussed for CEO evaluation to the governance committee is fine. I think.
Can I hear what that guy has to say? Because he seems to have something in mind.
Quick point. Ken?
One, and then I have to shut it down. I'm trying to have a board work session here, but please go ahead.
If the CEO is going to be on the governance committee, you might want to think about the evaluation being in a separate committee.
We would naturally interpret that, yes. Yes.
If the intent of the planning committee is short-term planning and to determine what the board is going to work on, and governing is governing, then I believe that governing should be evaluating the CEO. And I think we're getting too tied up in details. And I think what we need to say is overall, and the language is here, it is item, K is the corporate and governance ops, and L is the CEO evaluation.
Yes, it's not verbatim, but those 2 items are up on the slide.
It's not verbatim, both of them are here. All we're saying is who's going to.
Right, that's really the debate.
So let's just stick to that.
So let's stay focused and let me see if it's struggle. So the question on the table is, do we move them from the planning committee over to the governance committee. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Okay, great. Ken, it's 7:32 per the atomic clock in Boulder, Colorado. And I have permission to take a 10-minute break. Great, so a 10-minute break, and then we're right back here.
Thank you.
Thank you
For all the people over 60 in the room, they need a 10-minute break.
I'm not going to be the first to demonstrate that.
You didn't. Welcome home, John.
Thank you. I may. Everybody, folks. Sorry to do that. Reminder to turn your mics back on, please, for those watching. All right, thank you. Bruce, I think we timed it as best we could. Thank you for the break. Listen, given that there has been a lot of desire to chat, I'd like to make the following offer. Anybody that wishes to have a comment made, to say something, let me give you that opportunity again at the podium now. And at your pleasure, would you then give us the opportunity to have the rest of the evening for our continued workshop discussion, if that's fair. So if anybody has anything they'd like to share to the board at this time, please take an opportunity to step up to the board, to the podium, and we'll go from there.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yes, sir.
Can you reserve whatever time you want to give us? Can you give it to us at the time you're going to take up the issues that are controversial?
I'd rather not. If you have something to say, I'm giving you this opportunity. Please take advantage of it if you want. Take your opportunity to go up to the podium. We'll give you some time to talk about something that is
hard to do out of context. You know?
I appreciate that. We're trying to run a workshop here with the board. Please allow us that opportunity. Give us that opportunity, please. Yes, sir.
You may. Hi, I'm Vic Morvis. I'm a 25-year resident of Reston, and thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for volunteering for our community. I think there's a perception out there that there is some intent to control intake of who's going to be on the board in the future through this process. And if that is not the intent, it might be helpful to clear that up now, and you might have a smoother meeting. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Okay. Thanks for this second opportunity. You know who I am. I have one comment to make, and that is with respect to the issue that was raised by Richard Chu in terms of orientation of prospective candidates. From my point of view, anybody who is interested in becoming a board member should have attended a number of board meetings. Instead of getting an orientation from some committee of the board about how the board functions, what its job is, and what the issues are, you need people who have enough interest to come here and listen and make decisions on their own about what is good and what is bad and what is okay. Those are the people you want on the board who can think for themselves, not people who depend on pre-digested little bits of information, and who have the stomach to sit through the board meetings, because that's what they're going to have to do when they get elected.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Well, that's Mike.
If I could just respond to Vic. There's been lots of questions about what the process is all about and what we're talking about here. From my perspective, we're talking about improvement of the operational governance of the Reston Association. It is absolutely not about making decisions as a board as to who should run for the Reston board. You should run, you know, I was elected to the board of the Reston Association by the members of the association. And anything that we can do to get qualified, interested candidates to take on that challenge opportunity, I want to see as a member of this board that we put those processes in place here. Beyond that, orienting new members or individuals that are interested, absolutely key. Ensuring that those that get onto the board are effective and that we as a board can focus on policy. That's what this is all about from my perspective. But thank you for raising that point, and thanks for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, go ahead.
Ken, do you want to add to that comment?
I was just going to add
attention because you wrote and authored the original.
I did. Again, to clarify once and for all, if people will trust the statement, the intention is to improve the process. Purely and simple. The board for many years, and what we've discovered as many of us have been serving on the board now for many years, I'm coming into my 6th, we're trying to get the board focused and future boards focused on the whats and the whys, and allow the staff to get back to focusing on the who, the what, the wheres, and most importantly, the cost associated with it. So again, it made sense, having sat on many governance committees in other corporations, it makes sense given where Reston's growth is today. We're larger than many of the young startups that I've worked for a living. And it's time that we take our operations seriously and also as well take our policy and governance seriously. That was the only intent in contemplating back in our workshop on the 23rd, the concept of what can we do to formalize our governance and do a better job at it. Because as our directors have pointed out, there are things that are broken, there are things that we do because we've always done it this way. I'm sorry, many people on the board don't like that. They don't like going business as usual because it's not going to serve future boards and it's not going to serve the membership today as well as the future members as well.
The good news is we are right on schedule of your timed agenda. The bad news is we're on schedule in the central time zone, not the eastern time zone. I'm going to try to move us forward a little bit. We're going to move into a couple of areas where there were concerns expressed or some different ideas expressed or maybe some more radical word changes in the amendment to substitute throughout. So let's go ahead and start with strategic planning. Strategic planning is currently handled by the BPC. And again, having talked to some of you on the phone, let me just get to the point of strategic planning happens to be on the list of responsibilities, but because the committee is so overworked, I'm not sure how much time is being spent on it. So again, this was another one of those workload issues. Others of you on the phone articulated what I'd asked Jeff to say a little bit about earlier, which is then it would refocus the planning committee on the immediate work of the board and the governance committee more on the future orientation on the board. So even though you have a committee with the word planning in it, that's intended to be like operational, getting the board through the next meeting planning, more short-term orientation, and this would be more of the longer-term, orientation. So comments on whether or not this should be moved from the BPC over to the governance committee. Ken?
I don't mean to set the tone, but having sat on the board planning committee as a director and then as an officer for many years now, it is difficult because the majority of our time is spent in agenda setting. It's not even agenda planning, we're agenda setting. There is so much coming at Reston now, especially in the last year and a half, that I don't know how many people remember a year ago being in a board planning committee meeting that goes beyond 9. Now we're going to midnight in terms of setting agendas and listening to new motions and ideas and concepts from the community, what have you. We're having to address so many other things dealing with redevelopment. So in my opinion, this would have been a natural thing because it's not getting attention. Staff is having to remind a board, hey, it's time to do the strategic plan. Everybody here know when we're going to do the strategic plan setting? Anybody here know that? That's the issue. That's the issue. So it has to be taken seriously.
Other comments, Richard?
Yeah, at several points we've heard this load balancing proposition. And I understand that. If the majority of the members of the BPC are the same as the majority members of the governance committee, you're not load balancing.
We would agree.
Correct.
Okay, so I'm all in favor of load balancing if the resources are load balanced as well.
I think we all
Ken,
agree.
we're going to get to the composition, but the intention, I think, of the modifications and the input today, which Ken's been very receptive to, is to try to balance
I don't
You
see
signed
that
them
in the
off,
original
Mr.
resolution.
No, absolutely not. But
Okay.
you
That's
get
why
a
we're
lot of
here.
feedback.
Okay.
That's why we're
Yeah,
here.
there's a lot of feedback, and that's why we're here.
The reason I say that is that the load balancing was a fundamental principle of the original resolution.
Right, but remember, Richard, we have not gotten to, we haven't yet to be able to
Understand.
discuss
You're missing
the
the point.
resolution.
You're missing the point. The people who drafted the original resolution, okay, the membership, the proposed composition of the governance committee
I get it.
was very close to the
We understand.
composition,
Yeah, we got
okay?
it.
And that was called load balancing. Now, okay, I just want to make sure
We're cognizant of that, that's why we're here. But if you, again, if you look at the verbiage here in the screen, I just think it makes sense to be part of a committee that will take it seriously.
Bruce, may I say something?
Yeah,
else?
go ahead, Ellen. And then, Ellen, go ahead.
Please.
I am so impressed with the strategic planning of RA, and I'm impressed in the sense that the committees incorporate the strategic plan into their work plan. I have never worked with a board that has done that before, so I am really impressed on the effectiveness of the strategic plan.
Danielle?
I was just gonna say I agree to move it. I know we're gonna vote, but.
Let's get going.
Yes.
Bottom line first.
Regarding load balance, not regarding the specific composition, which is another issue, but regarding the total list of responsibilities of the new board, if you refer to the document that we all have that showed the items that were struck from the board planning committee and then moved to the board, to the governance committee, anyway, you can see a large field of blue that has been marked out
May I address that?
and a number that have, most done, and these have been added. So just in terms of content, we need to have a discussion of what's left for the board planning committee relative to the new, and there are some new duties associated with the governance committee. That is another element of balance.
I think it's a very good observation, but you have to look at the context of what is remaining. And much of it does center around short-term decisions and the agenda setting associated with it. And the majority of my experience, and those that have sat in, disagree or agree with me, the majority of our time is spent in the agenda settings because we're giving members the opportunity to speak, we're giving outsiders the opportunity to speak, we listen to new ideas, we're listening to our fellow directors introduce the concept of the new motion, which is an appropriate place to do it, all for the sake of the agenda. So by the time we get to the items that have been stricken out, they're not getting their due time.
And as a member of that committee, I think that we will better serve our members by having a more focused on getting their input, getting their ideas, and then making them become actionable items for the board so that we can spend more time on that so we don't have to be worrying about some of these other longer term things that deserve attention as well.
Yeah, but
So
again,
that's just my experience.
when you see the final list, the other thing I noticed, Rachel, is that many of the things that are moved over the governance committee are episodic. I mean, they're not month by month by month by month, but they're, you do the CEO evaluation in this quarter, and then you do, et cetera, et cetera. So there may be balance there, even though
Part
one
of the
list is
balancing
long.
equation as well.
Yeah, there might be part of that. So yes.
Yeah, I think with 1 and 2, okay, I think it needs to be wordsmithed a little bit in terms of, number 1, it's recommending a multi-year strategic plan. And by the way, by saying a multi-year strategic plan covering a 5-year period is somewhat redundant. But I think that it's the governance committee, assuming the strategic planning is moved to the governance committee, they're going to recommend a strategic plan to the board. They're going to recommend modifications to that strategic plan to the board. They're going to monitor and report to the board. And I think that the language needs to reflect that kind of action, the deliverables.
Michael?
Yeah, 2 points. First point, I would really like to urge my peers on the board to commit to try to get through this process this evening. I really think that this is important and that we should really try to gear what we do to try to get through the entire agenda before the evening's end. The second point, just a suggestion to the point that the board planning committee is really operations. Perhaps that's what we could call it. We could call it the board operations committee. It's really about managing the agenda. It's really about the operations of the board on a continuing cycle.
Thanks, Mike.
Very good idea.
The bop.
Thank you.
There you go. Go ahead.
The bop.
Did you give us
Okay.
the bop?
Wait, folks, Kate, I have a question from Kate.
I think strategic planning, developing a strategic plan for the organization is a responsibility of the entire board.
Agreed.
Not of this committee. It's just, I see this as coming up with a process for the board to enter into strategic plan development. I would hope that the board would consider including the committee leadership in the future in strategic plan development. You have in the past with the senior leadership team. But I definitely don't believe that the governance committee should come up with the strategic plan. That's a full board activity. Just as my, yes, John? No.
Well, I think,
Sorry.
excuse my naivete, but that seems to be exactly what it says.
Right.
It
John,
needs
it
the board.
It's my understanding the intention of the first point is just there's a small group that gets you started, but that's why the phrase leads the board. The governance committee is not recommending anything to the full board on strategic planning, except let's do something, let's have a retreat, let's. So, because that's the phrase lead the board.
That committee would organize.
Would help organize.
I would then be comfortable that
Yes.
we can figure out how to, on number 2, simply say it's not just monitoring, it's to report back to the, whatever its findings are when it's monitoring.
Okay.
But to Mike's point, I'm very comfortable with having a discussion on some of these things and not necessarily wordsmithing it to death, under the assumption that whoever is going to draft the resolution is paying attention to the comments and is going to come back to the board for discussion and more robust discussion of the proposed resolution. And let me finish, okay? And I don't mean as a, I think that it deserves a more of a discussion, or potentially deserves more of a discussion than 20 minutes at a board meeting.
Okay. Ken, do you want to respond to that?
I agree, Richard. Again, tonight, I think let's get through and agree with the intent of what we're looking at, whether you're using this or whatever document you're using, but I think this is a good summary doc, and see if the intentions, at least the low-hanging fruit ones, bear fruit, and then go forward with, obviously, we're not even at the place this late in the evening with what I was hoping we would get to as to why many of us are all here for one particular reason or another.
Per Danielle's recommendation, move the strategic planning items to the board planning committee. There you go. Danielle, your first successful recommendation. Affirmation of the committee itself. Who said you weren't prepared? That lawyer must have done something. So let's move into another area. These are going to get a little bit more difficult, but stay focused less on wordsmithing, more on intention. So this has to do with the board composition and leadership, throughout. And again, this is the confusion, I think, over what was intended versus, the language being used. But first and foremost, this concept of, quote, lead an assessment of the current and anticipated needs for the board composition. There didn't seem to be much disagreement, item 1 here. I mean, basically, you would do a skill survey within your own board to determine what you have around the table, and as you move forward, what are the needs that you have, as you move forward. Okay, there didn't seem to be much disagreement with this first item. I'm going to kind of move forward watching body language. None of you appear to be shy. Item 3, identify potential board candidates and explore their interest and availability. Almost to a person in the telephone interviews, each of you told me individually, that's our job. Our job is to be alert and aware of potential community members who might be great at board service and to encourage them and get them to attend a board meeting like, one of the suggestions was earlier, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there didn't seem to be anything contentious here, correct?
It's
Go ahead, Rachel.
contentious if it's the responsibility of the committee. It's not contentious if it's the individual actions of board members to be an ambassador to the community.
Okay.
I suggest, though, that if no group has any responsibility and accountability for helping to ensure that there's a pool, then it's likely we're all going to go, well, I don't know, I didn't run into anybody. How about you? Did you do it? It's like, if you don't see it as your committee's responsibility, then I think it's very likely to not happen.
Rachel, based on what you just said, Rachel, maybe the modification is encourage board members to identify potential board candidates and explore their interest and availability. That is both puts the onus back on the individuals, but it leaves it with a committee to come back to you and say, okay, who's doing what? What are the names? Maybe you open every meeting by saying, who have we run into that might be a potential good on the committee? Jeff?
Eva, I hear what you're saying, and I take that very seriously. I'm always out looking for people who want to serve on the community and volunteer. Get on our committees. We need great people on our committees if we're going to be effective. I think the optics are very bad, though, by putting this under one specific committee. I think if we can find another way to be sure that we all understand that it's all of our responsibility to do that, including the leadership. I think the optics here are just really, really bad and send the wrong message.
Even with the encourage?
Yeah, even with the encourage. I think the optics are just very poor.
Other comments or suggestions? Danielle?
I agree, because this has been a lightning bolt, and this is what we hear a lot about. But any organization I've been involved with, there's always a volunteer chair. Like, someone has to be tagged, or for a better term, with, we've got to start recruiting. So, they have to provide the nudge to everybody else. Come on, guys, we are going to have empty seats and nothing's going to get done next year. So how can we?
But I don't think we need to. I would hope that the president, and that you can, because I think you do a great job in this already. But I would think that the president is the one. I know the associations I've been involved with. That's who's usually been the volunteer person. Is the president's the one who's nudging the other people to say, hey, we need to get somebody to be on that fields commissioner. Who we got? And that role should be happening through the leadership organically. And I don't think we need to spell it out as a committee's role.
John?
This looks bad.
Going back to Ken's earlier statement about why we're here, I'm looking at this issue and asking, what does this fix, or what does it improve? I don't know what it fixes, because I don't think it's broken. We've not had such a function in the past, a committee to encourage people to run. Heaven knows we have people running. Look around the table. And I'm not sure how we improve the process by putting it off into a committee. It indeed is everyone's responsibility. Does that improve it at all? I don't think so. I think we would do well. Take that off the table. Eliminate some of the confusion. I mean, that whole phrase, establish a pool of candidates, is troublesome.
The third option, Jeff, based on your comment, would be to add some form of this to the expectations of individual directors. Right. So at some point, you're going to have here are the board responsibilities, and here's what's expected, and then there's your job description. Yep. And to add some form of this to the individual. Comments,
I'd be
Rachel?
very happy with that.
Very quickly, I think the responsibility in a very general sense to convey the value of the RA to its members is through our communication outlets, through the media outlets, and then also the election board to educate people about their opportunities to vote. Those two committees, and if we as a board direct them, undertake those activities, the job is done We do the rest in the way Jeff has described.
So,
But the elections
go
committee
ahead.
runs a process. They are responsible for the actual process of conducting the election.
Yeah,
They
stay
do
away
not do
from that.
anything with candidates at all.
They do, though, and they did this year, is they went out and they had sessions, or they went to individual communities to try and encourage people to know what the voting process was for. And that's an essential step.
That's about
which they can
voting.
do.
Yeah, and again, remember earlier we have the orientation of potential and new, so we maybe covered it. Ken, I'd like to offer a suggestion based on Jeff's comment, and that would be to eliminate item number 3 from this current governance committee and to add some form of, quote, encourage board members to identify potential board candidates, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as part of the individual board member expectations job description, eliminating this parenthetical.
Absolutely.
Phrase. Tend to agree? Richard?
I agree, but I also think that going back to Treasurer Higgins' comment earlier, number 1 is not necessarily a recurring task.
I think we're just focusing on item 3.
I'm sorry, what?
Okay.
Ken, go ahead. Sorry.
Richard, I believe Bruce was making a comment about item 1, and I believe we were taking a concur, not agree on item 3 and eliminating item 3.
Okay.
Yeah, the issue right now on the table is to eliminate item 3 from the responsibility of a governance committee and in some format make it part of the individual board member job description.
Okay.
That's what we're focusing on. I apologize. I saw positive body language on 1, so I kind of moved forward, and there was nothing been written, no emails that attacked.
Do we need to address item 1 again?
Excuse me?
Do we need to address item 1 more time?
Let's come back to that. Can I get an affirmation on number 3 to eliminate it from here and move it? Tend to agree, tend to disagree? Are you okay with that, Rachel?
I'm okay.
Okay, great. And then, Richard, did you want to go back? I assume that this was okay the way it's written. Did you want to go back to that? Again, I was just watching body language. Did you want to go back to that?
I think in my mind, the only thing I'm concerned about, I'm okay with the task. I'm just not sure that that is a recurring task.
Right.
Okay? And if it's not a recurring task, and we're going back to some of the original discussions, not to repeat those, okay, then that becomes an ad hoc task assigned by the board once, maybe 3 years later or whatever, it needs to be refreshed. But I think that once you basically, in the first place, you have to be really careful about how you word that, because it is not a qualification to run.
Absolutely.
Okay, it is what we're looking for in terms of general attributes.
Okay. And again, the only reoccurring would be when new board members come on, updating, the assessment skills, database.
I'm not sure that this board, that we should really get down that far. I think that in terms of, some broad statements with respect to knowledge, attributes, skills, and abilities and influence, okay, are fine and much more generic, but I don't think that we should take the pulse of the board and say, oh, we wanted a doctor, and we didn't get a doctor. So this year we have to make an extra hard push to get a doctor on it.
So are you recommending eliminating the first sentence and keeping the second sentence?
No, I'm saying eliminate 1 and have it as a unique charge to the committee.
Okay.
In the work plan, if you will.
Lucinda, comment on this item? Lucinda, did you have an additional comment on this
Oh, no, let's finish that item, my comments.
Danielle?
I don't see the point in 1 now.
Yeah.
I know with a corporation, it's very important to fill your board with the expertise that's needed. I'm not sure, standing by itself, that little thing, I'm not sure what it adds.
Yep, I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
Is that just like an inventory?
This is going to be careful on which cards we pick up. The affirmative statement is to advance this forward as part of the responsibility of the governance committee, tend to agree, tend to disagree.
Well, before we vote, can someone tell me why, like, why is it here? Like, if we say we don't want it, which right now I don't want it, but can somebody tell me why we would want it?
Well,
What does it do?
go ahead, Mike.
No, you go ahead.
I'll
defer to the president.
I agree with you. I've been on and sit on several corporate boards that are in the private sector where, especially in the technology industry, where this is critical, especially with board members and their backgrounds, et cetera.
Exactly.
But at the same instance, I'm also cognizant that a board like this being volunteer-oriented can quickly churn because of needs, family issues, what have you. The neat thing about boards in the corporate world, they're pretty well committed because they have a financial.
They're paid.
They're paid. Here, people will come and go. And I can't. How many directors have we lost this in the last 2 years because of family issues, what have you? We then have churn for elections. So we are constantly getting new members here. So for the sake of all of the board, especially a newcomer, to know who is on the board in terms of their skill sets, how long they've been on this board, where have they come from, things that you can probably glean from their resumes if they're well done and capture in a skills, you know, what I call corporate knowledge database, I think
So
would be.
this is just to, like, okay,
That's
new
not what
board
this says,
member,
Ken.
here
I
you
would
go,
agree
this
with
is what
you.
everyone has.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if
I worked recently with Cornerstones, and they prepared a checklist feedback sheet for directors to fill out so that they could ascertain who had different skills.
Yeah, and the natural fallout is if we have a need for, you know, we lost somebody who was very close to the fiscal committee. Who else? And there are new members here who may not have that answer. Rather than depend upon the sage of one of us that's been here forever and say, trust me, she's good, you would like to have something to look at and review on your own and double check that it isn't the opinion of a particular board member that's been here forever to say, no, this person would be perfect for that. That's what we're trying to eliminate.
And I think that what you just said makes perfect sense. That's not what this says. This is before coming on the board. What you just said is taking a skills assessment of those who have been seated on the board, okay? And I think that that's an excellent idea. But I don't think
that needs to be portrayed into anticipated needs as well.
But I think that it's again a matter of optics on this.
Sure.
Because the way I'm reading it now too is, well, we're going to identify the skills we need, then we're going to go get people to fill out.
I'm fine with it. I've just seen the behavior.
Democratic process.
I've seen the behavior of 5 boards, more than 5 boards, where that hasn't been the case. It is an individual or group of individuals that. There are many times I feel like I'm watching the series Survivor and seeing the alliance building behind the scenes, and that's what I'm trying to get. I'm trying to put more information out for everybody to see. But again, I'm wide open.
Survivor's on right now, by the way. It's
15
15 minutes.
I know.
They're off the boat, and on the
I know.
We're starting to split them apart.
We need to move it forward. I'm comfortable with removing it, but that was why I saw the
I'd like
value
to take
of
a
it.
straw vote, and then we'll see if we need more comments.
Mike,
on
I
that.
think
But
you had a comment.
Be careful which card you pick up.
Yeah.
Michael, comment, and then.
Very quickly, at risk of the clock, I'll try to speak as in the open. This makes sense with respect, in my opinion, to only filling a board vacancy. This is something that the board appropriately would perhaps do if we're filling a vacancy. Regular election of a director, we have no business pre-identifying anything.
I agree.
I agree.
Michael?
He made it better than I could.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so comment, advance this responsibility as part of the governance committee charge. Tend to agree, tend to disagree.
What do we say? Take it
What was
out?
that? Take it out.
Take
So
it
the
out.
affirmative statement,
Don't
the
take it
affirmative
out.
statement is leave it in.
I agree with you.
Take it out.
Okay. So we're going to eliminate. Ken, you're okay with that? So we're
Yes.
eliminating,
But I would
number
think
1.
you can capture what you two guys just outlined in the document.
I don't know that we need
Lost
to.
road.
I think that happens organically. You know.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, agreed.
So we can continue to talk about what we already agree on, or we can move forward.
move forward. Let's move
More
forward.
items.
Let's move.
We have already taken a vote on this, hadn't we? And we
Yes.
That's
agreed
gone.
to eliminate this and move it into
Yep.
individual expectation. Okay. So now things I thought we might have some concern of.
Wait, can I just, sorry.
No, what do you have?
So I just wanted to talk about the title, board composition and leadership. Because I think we all agree that we want to, get the best candidates and get the best board members that we need and fill our needs. However, we're elected, we're elected board members. We're supposed to represent the community. So I was wondering if we could take out board composition, just have board leadership in it, because it kind of seems that's where we're going anyways. It's leadership of the board. The board doesn't decide who's on the board. The community, the members of the Reston Association decide who's on the board. So I think taking that out would be more clear.
I'll second that motion.
Let's vote on that.
That's fine. So the new title of an item which may not have anything under it.
Right, exactly.
And we're eliminating the phrase composition and, correct?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I think we have positive body language for that. So. Now, this may have been a lightning rod statement. Ken might have put in that purposely to encourage participation, both from the community and from the board, to kind of wake people up. You know, you always throw some Latin in the middle of a document just to see if anyone's reading it, per se. So again, the comments so far tonight would suggest to me that
That's a
we would
non-starter.
eliminate item number 2. So eliminate item number 2. Tend to agree, tend to disagree?
Eliminate, yes, eliminate. Yes.
Eliminate.
Oh.
Scared me.
I'll let you read item number 4.
This is post-election.
And again, I underlined the phrases where there were some differences of opinion throughout. So comments on item number 4? Go ahead, Richard. Jeff, I'm sorry.
I think that's a great role for the governing committee, is to kind of do an assessment of people's skills and capabilities and interests, and then match those interests with the needs of the board and the community. I think it makes sense to have the leadership folks doing that type of assessment and doing that exploration. Makes good sense to me.
Yep.
Okay. Can
Does the language say, therefore you will do it because I say that?
No.
You will clean the bathrooms
No.
because...
No worries about
Don't check that box on your skills. Yeah, sure.
No worries about foot and mouth
Yeah.
syndrome. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yes.
So are we okay at advancing item number 4 as a responsibility under the new board
Yeah.
leadership item?
Yeah.
Tend to agree, tend to disagree? Okay, great. Are you okay, Rachel?
Yes, I believe
Great,
so.
thank you. This drew some confusion, and again, it may have as much to do with the composition versus. It's my understanding that, well, can someone describe to me how officers get elected, what the current process is, because then we can discuss whether or not the governance committee needs to be involved to change that process. Can someone describe that process?
I will
Rachel?
just describe the process as it was in the most recent election. And this is what I consider one of the issues and something that can be fixed. And that is that we were elected on one day, we selected officers on the second day of our tenure. That really did not give an opportunity for the existing board members to become familiar with the skills and experience of the new board members or to participate in that process in a significant way. There are a couple of ways to address that. One is, I think, maybe have a separation of time between the election, maybe have a retreat when we have a chance to get to know each other better, then have the election. That gives a much larger opportunity to us to make good judgments about our composition and our officers. Right now, frankly, it is highly skewed to the existing board to decide who are the officers because they're the only ones who know the other officers. And new members of the board, like myself, would be reticent to assume that we could put ourselves in a position as president having just stepped on the board.
Okay, so again, one piece of the process currently is a speedy election. The day, the very first board meeting that you show up at, you're electing officers. That's one piece. How else? Tell me how else the process.
I think that what really happens, and it's probably, I think, not, it's completely I would say pretty standard on most boards. You know, they can't have a break. You can't have, you know, you can't go 2 weeks without a board, a governance determined. But I would say that in general, for 99% of the boards that I have been on, it would be inappropriate for new members to take leadership roles because they don't know anything about what's going on. I mean, so it would not be appropriate. So for example, even though you have skills and talents, it may not be appropriate for you to be president. You have no clue about the body of work that's been ongoing. And so I think that what happens is,
again, this has nothing to do with individuals.
Oh, no. I was really speaking to her comment. You know, I mean,
it's just that a brand new director.
Right. So,
great.
Any new director, and so what really happens is, you know, the people who are here kind of
nominate from among themselves. Yeah. I'm going to keep going left around there, and so let Cindy go ahead, and then Richard, and then I'll.
Well, seeing as how all of our meetings are open, it could be that the newly elected person has been attending meetings and reading and is up on the issues. However, that's not my point. Also, and you're right, we can't have a period of time without officers, but we could let the candidates know who's been selected or who won the election a couple weeks before the first board meeting, because that would allow time, you know, for candidates to get to know the board members and vice versa, and, you know, for more communication before we have the first meeting and make an election.
And, you know, and I think that may tie into, you know, we talked about the orientation process, or, you know, the candidate and then the post-election orientation process. Perhaps that type of time could be built in as part of that process development.
If I may, I think we need some legal opinion on a couple of these items before we go too far.
I don't think you can.
Your bylaws specifically indicate that the initial meeting of the newly composed board of directors shall be held on the day following the annual meeting of members at a place and time to be set by the board.
Okay, there you
go. The
go.
Primary purpose of such meeting shall be to elect officers. So this goes back to an earlier discussion. If you're going to change that operationally, you're going to have to go back and amend the bylaw, because that's what the bylaws state.
Not impossible to do, but it's a little bit more cumbersome. I'm going to keep going left to right. So Jeff, I missed you. So you comment, and then Richard, we're to you.
Oh,
and
I get ideas as people talk. You know?
Right.
But you know, I think it's primarily an optics issue. Is that having the governing committee propose a slate of directors? I think it's just bad. It's bad optics, and I think the way it works now is that the floor is open for nominations for officer positions. I think that works, and anybody can be nominated to be any officer, and I think that process works. And this here, again, anybody can still do it. You know, the governing committee can still nominate a slate, but it's an optics thing. Why create that bad optics when anybody can be nominated anyway?
And so that's the second important piece of the current process, the way it stands, that there are nominations from the floor, which includes self-nomination.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
So any new member, now, again,
yeah.
you may not know it,
Yeah.
but we're going to have a better orientation, but any new member
we follow
could
an
be
official
nominated
process.
or self-nominated.
We first do the president, then if that happens to happen, then we go forward with the vice president, secretary, treasurer.
Again, Rachel, it doesn't completely solve that issue about one day after, you know, the annual meeting, but again, that is struck into your bylaws. So I'm going to keep going. Richard and then John.
Okay, so let's cover a couple of points. Number one, to this discussion here, we have had extremely experienced people elected to the board who have served on the board before and who have served as officers on the board. Number two, we have had people who have never served on the board elected to the board and chosen as officers. In fact, in one case that comes immediately to mind, that person was chosen as president. Okay, as a new member of the board, having never served on the board, and to the best of my knowledge, really never having participated much in the process. Was a good president, I thought, but that's beside the point. okay? The third point is there is, from year to year, significant lobbying that takes place up to the annual meeting as to who's going to run for what position and whether or not there are multiple candidates. In most cases, there is a slate. Okay, in recent years, there has been a slate. And no one has ever beat that slate. Now, that's right or wrong. We're just talking about process. There's a process that goes on. And that process includes reaching out to prospective new directors and getting and soliciting their vote.
This isn't, I mean, I think everybody
So that's an
understands
informal
what the
part of
process.
the
Yeah, it is an
process.
informal process.
That's the process, okay? But I would say, understanding the process, I think that can be eliminated.
Okay, so again, what you're going to end up with is status quo, which there's two pieces of the puzzle that have been identified, which is day after and/or nominations from the floor, or some type of change. This is a change. John? And I'm going to keep coming around the room. John?
Yeah, I just want to kind of go to your question. I think Richard has probably filled you in. The process. There's a written process and there's the unwritten process.
Right.
And the written process is very simple. Nomination from the floor. Council goes off into another room. Counts up the ballots, comes back and tells us the unopposed candidate won. Okay, that's
big surprise.
And he's good at that. The unwritten process is what Richard describes is with people who have an interest in taking a leadership role, try to gather support for that interest sometime before the election. And it's very unorganized. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes frankly I don't think it has worked. But we end up with what we have. This has worked.
Ken, do you have any comments on what you've heard today?
It would be good to have a more orderly process. I'm not sure I like the idea of a slate of candidates, but rather identify those wishing to run or stand for election.
And that's why you have the nomination
Going to
process.
Rachel's point, and I think, at least I would hope, that whether a person is a new director or not, if they're interested in a leadership role, they're already well known. They've been on committees, they've been in the community, they know each other. If they're not well known, they'll kind of go to the point that
I'm going to try to keep us moving forward so that we can get finished.
You get the point.
There's two other big issues. So anything major to add, Ken?
I'm comfortable with it being removed. My intent was to eliminate the informal process. Because what I see running the elections since I've been in Reston, the elections and the officers selected appear to come from that small group of people. And I'm not picking on it, but every board meeting, I see the same group of people in the audience. And I see the same big group of people coming back and back and around. We're not getting the 80% silent majority because they're going, I don't want to play that game. It's political. It's backstabbing. People already know each other. There's a game plan in place. I don't want to get near it. I wouldn't stand a chance because I have great ideas, but I don't build slates. I'm a volunteer. I'm a neighbor. That's what I was trying to eliminate and trying to get this process more out into the open so we can eliminate this slate building that I am sick and tired of.
Other comments? Anyone major comments?
I just wanted to respond to Rachel. I can understand your agita, your concern, the concern because it's done so hurriedly. You just came on board. You don't know the people, but on the other hand, I don't think we can afford to put RA's business on hold for a period of time. We still have to conduct business.
Right. Okay, Michael, anything to add?
Yeah, I don't like the words. I'm concerned about the optics, but my thought was something around developing a more orderly, systematic process.
Okay. Eve?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, if we don't identify people up front who are interested in leadership, then what will happen is is what does happen. You know, there will be sort of the alliance building and sort of, okay, you know, how's that going to play out? I do think that experience, board experience, counts for a lot. I mean, I do. And I think that there is value even in the progression of the officer seats. You know, I mean, you know, it's a big job. So.
Danielle, any additional comments?
2 points. One is, I'm not sure, Ken, if we can do this, my attorney friend. How can we delay this for 1 month? Can you just have the acting officers who are in there?
The lame duck.
The lame duck. No?
Well, suppose I didn't get reelected.
You would have to change the bylaws. Danielle, if you change the bylaws, you can.
Okay. So second thing is, we can talk about this later, is really an equitable split of assignments. When you come on board, if you aren't a president, a treasurer, etc., what committees will you be assigned to? It's a bigger issue for later, but I think that is kind of at the heart of the matter.
Okay. But again, that would be an issue
this.
for the future. Rachel?
Danielle's concerns reflect mine completely.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is the need for more discussion on a new process, but this ain't it. So eliminate item number 5 from the current responsibilities of governance chair. 10 to agree, 10 to disagree. Again, Ken, what I'm hearing kind of indirectly is that you need to somehow charge some group or some task force in the future to continue to work on this idea as we move it forward. Okay? It is time for you to call your families and ask for sleeping bags to be brought over. It is 8:33 per my calculation. This was a big issue. This has to do with items that were originally under, quote, board roles and effectiveness, which have to do with the whole ethics discussion. And the feedback that you received already from Rachel's amendment to substitute and one of her constituents' email that we got and someone else's comment that, you know, I was reading is that the question on the table is, A, is something necessary around establishing a code of conduct and holding board members to adherence against that code of conduct? And or second to that, if so, should it be part of the governance committee or should it be a standalone, you know, committee? And if a standalone committee, is it of board members or does it include, you know, outsiders? So Ken, do you want to start us on this discussion?
Yeah. Again, I'm more interested in the function and the processes. And my assumption was it seemed to me to make sense to fit into the governance committee. My bigger concern is, and this is where I think we're going to have a discussion, I'll ask Ken to participate. The independent persons, while it does make sense, I think we have to be concerned from a legality standpoint. We as a corporation will encounter scenarios where a committee with independents may cause a conflict. Ken, I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
I think the code of conduct is something that you can consider. I think ultimately what you need to do is remember that you're a corporate setting. You are a corporation. On the laws of the Commonwealth of Virginia, who's the head of the corporation? It's the board. The board makes those decisions. So establishing a separate committee to determine whether the board, and I don't know what the purpose is, obviously it depends on what the purpose of an ethics committee is, but to have an internal ethics committee make a decision about something the board or a board member did, and then that gets taken to court, and I'm now in a position of having to defend the association. One group within the organization is saying bad, one group is saying not bad, and of course the judge is going to look at me, make up your mind, Mr. Chadwick, you got to have it one way or the other. So the reality is the board is the ultimate authority. The only way that you get rid of a board member is there's a list of things in the bylaws with regard to crimes of moral turpitude. All that is deemed to be a resignation. But in reality, the only way that you get rid of a board member, the only way you punish a board member is by removal, and that takes a membership vote.
Yes.
There's really not a whole lot. I mean, you can censure, you can do some of the things that they let you do under Robert's rules. If you decide to take that course of action, write a letter, put it in the minutes, censure, whatever. There's not a whole lot that you're going to do. Having a code of conduct at least establishes a baseline. The problem with a code of conduct, though, is whether that code of conduct is in fact enforceable. Because in most situations, unless it's in the documents that requires you to sign that code of conduct, there's no contractual obligation to A, sign it, or B, to have it enforced. Having a code of conduct at least establishes what is expected of you. But as far as looking at it as a legal, enforceable contract, you're going to have a little bit of a problem with that.
So let's just assume that the board code of conduct is more of a value statement, more of a cultural, you defining amongst yourselves how we ought to act. And again, we're not looking to use it as a legal document. It's just an agreed upon, this is how we want to operate. This is how we want to get along, throughout. And again, you already have policies on director communication, conflict of interest, confidentiality. So this is the left-hand side's the minimum, right? It's just saying that a committee, be it the governance committee, et cetera, is going to periodically review these policy statements as they exist, and whether you're following them, are you adhering to your own policies that are already written? And then second to that, and I think this came out of the retreat, the need to articulate in writing a soft code of conduct so that we can all agree on how we intend to treat each other and operate as a board. So the left-hand side's the soft side. The right-hand side's the harder side, which Ken is raising questions about in terms of its legality.
Realize I can give you what I believe to be the case. It's your decision to make. But under the circumstances, I need to at least express that so that you're all aware of that and make your decision.
So the right-hand side, even as it's written, Rachel, as you proposed it and some of the feedback that came back to you to propose it, even as it's written, doesn't suggest you can ever get rid of anyone or that you can hold them to this from a legal standpoint. Again, the only thing you could do is go back. What is the? I forget what it's called when you try to remove a director through a vote.
It's a referendum.
Referendum, yeah. You would have to.
Yeah.
It would have to go
be a
through
membership-wide referendum
of the people. So again, Proposition A is kind of a soft, including the governance committee. You've heard some comments from members. Maybe if there's an incident that arises that would cause you to want to change that, to set a separate task force or a separate committee of board members, that's all possible. Right-hand side more specific. Lucinda?
I just want to point out, and this is a soft thing, as you said, or as John said, there's two processes. We as a board, as a group, can decide, the code of conduct, and we can also decide the consequences. I was on a committee where we had a board of conduct, and we had consequences, and it was called spots. If you got 4 spots, then you had to explain yourself to the rest of the group. But I mean, there is a way that you could have soft consequences.
Yes.
That the entire group agreed on.
Yes.
So
okay.
It's not that we can't enforce anything. It's that
right. It's just the extreme of removal is what we're talking about. What else? Other comments? Yes. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, let me start with breaking and improving. I don't know that we have anything in the area of conduct or ethics that's broken that needs to be fixed. I'm not sure that it's an improvement to have the committee established, as Lucinda was saying. This is kind of a board function, rather than having a committee.
Let me interrupt here because, again, we go back to the original premise. The committee isn't creating this, so you're not delegating final authority. By definition.
This particular point says that it does, that's all. It says
so
established.
that may be a need to change the language.
That may be a word. I just want to clarify that. Take that part. The second part is, we have from time to time, this is the improvement part, I think. We have from time to time had questions about the propriety of someone's conduct. You might consider it, I don't know, a legal issue or an ethical issue, but there have from time to time been questions, and we have no method of resolving or addressing those questions. So even without sanctions, I think it would be helpful for the board to be able to hear the, and during the break I referred to this as our own grand jury. Maybe if someone has a complaint, this committee could hear it, whichever committee assigned to, and say, there's no merit to this. Well, there is merit, and we take it to the full board to hear what the issue is, and case by case decide if there's anything.
Ken?
Would it be appropriate for this committee to basically lead the process of code of ethics matters?
I'm sorry, what committee, Ken?
The
governance committee. To lead the process. So they would take charge if there's a grievance, if there's an issue, at least we have a process and the governance committee would.
It is a governance issue.
It's like the fox guarding the hen house. What if the issue is with somebody who's on the governance committee? I think you need outside perspective.
Well, except would you be having then like a whole completely, like a non-board committee to say, oh, you shouldn't have consulted somebody outside of the board for documentation of blah, 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 or you shouldn't have been, recruiting on the side somebody, I mean.
I would have a mix, as the comments, earlier from the members of the association.
What hammer would they have?
Suggested that there be a mix of board members and qualified members outside of the board.
I'm very fearful of having an appendix. Heaven forbid it gets turned into a legal matter or a contractual matter with outside the board. I don't know how that would be handled. Ken, I would go to you for that, but I'm just looking at the worst case scenario where that really makes me nervous in terms of we're now sharing information outside the corporation.
Can you clarify your concern? And I'm not sure I disagree with you, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Are you saying that there's a potential legal liability to D3?
No, I'm working on the issue on the left side. Yeah.
No, I apologize.
Okay. All right. That's what I want to make.
I'm focusing on, because what I'm hearing is a discussion of independent outsiders, so that points me right to the right-hand side.
So let me ask this. Regardless of where it ends up, do we have general support for D3 and D4 that as a board, you need to, quote, regularly review your practices on these items? And the second to that, as a board, you need to establish and periodically review a code of conduct. Do we have general agreement on that?
Board.
As a board, that's fine. As a board, I don't.
With one clarification on D4, and I'll leave the wordsmithing to somebody else, but in D4, since we don't have a defined board of conduct, a code of conduct, the governance committee would recommend to the board the code of conduct and then periodically review that over time.
So Ken, your lead comment was lead the process. So let's assume that it now reads lead the process to establish and periodically review a board code of conduct. So can I get a vote? Just wherever it ends up, is there any need for this board of directors to establish and do D3 and D4? Okay? Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Okay, great. So now the question is, in the short term versus the long term, do we assign that right now to the governance committee? Or is there more discussion that's needed? So let's just test it. Let's see where we are. So assign D3 and D4 as responsibilities to the governance committee. Tend to agree, tend to disagree.
Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not a standalone committee?
No, that's an option. That's an option. So you hold up a red card if you think the standalone. So would anyone like to speak further on a standalone committee? Because those are the two things. I'm just going to make one declarative statement.
So just to be clear, we've put D3 and D4. That's what we're talking about. So far, there's no adjudication process.
Right, that's what,
okay.
It may never be. Yeah.
And there may never be. Okay. So this is simply reviewing, recommending to the board. The board makes decisions.
Absolutely. And quite honestly, if you put it nowhere, by default, and this may even be part of state law, it falls back to the president. So it's the president's job to ensure that the board makes these two things happen. If you don't decide to put it in, so
I mean, we have a resolution with director communication. We have a resolution with conflict of interest. We have an implied resolution with respect to confidentiality when it comes to executive sessions. Okay, so that's already done. So it's just a question of periodically looking at those
policies.
Okay.
Not implied.
Implied.
And Richard, let me just suggest, as a best practice, anytime a board passes a policy or resolution, it ought to be assigned to some body or group to periodically review, update it, or it won't get done. So I think a couple of people would like to make some comments in favor of a standalone group before we take a straw vote. Rachel?
And that would be me for one. A standalone group, I think, would have two jobs. One is that I think there's a consolidation of the ethical responsibilities of the board that needs to occur. I think there are internal sanctions that can be placed on individuals who work outside that ethical standards, and they would be effective. For example, removal from a committee, removal from an advisory committee, or censure. Okay. That can be done by the committee, by the board, and directed at the individual who was responsible for that.
Comment well made.
And not quite done yet. Then secondly, you would like to have that board the degree of independence that it can have. It would be an error, I believe, to take the individuals who are proposed in the governance committee now, who are at greatest risk of being placed in the position of ethical conflict because of their relative authority and power. For that reason, I would not.
Yeah, again, I can guarantee you that's going to change. I don't know if we're going to get to it, but I can guarantee you that's going to change. Danielle?
I agree with what Rachel was saying in terms of there are measures we could take. We could strengthen this up. If it stays under the Board Governance Committee, I would like for it to be its own big letter, not buried under board role and effectiveness. But I'm kind of okay with it in governance.
Any other comments in favor of a standalone? Lucinda?
So if we can't figure out a legal way to have outside people, which I imagine that we would be able to do that if we can't, we do have the option of having a standalone committee that's with still has board members only in it, but not specifically the ones that are on the governance.
Yes, absolutely. So again, we've agreed that D3 and D4 need to exist somewhere. You've heard arguments pro and con. Make it part of the governance committee, and if you vote green card on that tonight, a year from now, 2 years from now, if something changes in your mind, you can always modify your own charge to committee. But more comments, Jeff.
I'm wondering why these type of issues, if there was a code of conduct concern, why it just wouldn't come to the board. If I had a problem with the conduct of a board member and it couldn't be resolved otherwise, I don't know why I just wouldn't come to the whole board and say, hey, I think that Mike did wrong in this area, and we should sanction his behavior because it's not reflective of what we want the RA community to be. So I'm not sure what extra benefit we get from a committee.
Michael, would you like to respond to the behavior you're being accused of?
I am.
And no hypothetical. No hypothetical.
Guilty, right?
I think that
Because I don't think it happens that much, but if it did.
we need a mechanism, a process to handle infractions against the code of conduct. So I think that the governance committee is the right place for D3 and D4, but I think we need also something that talks about process when there are appearances of impropriety or otherwise, so that the sitting board can act on it.
Okay.
And not all complaints will come from within the board.
Right.
Yeah. So we don't have the membership coming in and asking the board. We don't want that. We probably would do well to have a group that a member could raise an issue to. Let them talk about it and say, no, this is not an issue. Right. Or yes, it is an issue, we'll bring it to the board.
Quite honestly, this happens now. It's been happening, and I assume, Ken, it's coming to you.
I think there are many
outsiders
times,
have complaints.
Jeff, you might have more of a constitution to be able to do what you just suggested, but I think there are members of the board now or future that will feel hesitant to do something because of potential backlash or what have you. So I agree with Mike, if we could at least give them the mechanism to know that there's a proper way to do this if you feel concerned and feel comfortable about proposing whatever it is that concerns you.
Okay. And I think that you mentioned the idea of making it easier for a member to have a place to go to that can say, hey, I think there's a problem here.
Sure.
Let me tell you what it is.
Example.
And that committee or whatever could say, well, let me tell you, in the bylaws, this is what it says, and our code of conduct says this is okay. So I appreciate your concern, but it doesn't look like it's a problem.
And it
could be a good conversation. Start a conversation. All right, you guys are changing things. All right.
And it could, in fact, be an entirely separate entity. I know private corporations and otherwise have, hotlines that they call when there are issues that they want to share.
And I think, maybe have a separate committee might be it.
So I'm going to take a straw vote. D3 as written, D4 modified to say lead the process to establish and periodically review a board code of conduct. These two items, and only these two items, are going to be charged to the current governance committee. 10 to agree, 10 to disagree. Okay?
Both. You got both.
Excuse me? That's okay. That's okay. Okay, I'm going to move us on then. You see the red versus
Can I
the
ask,
green? Richard?
before we move on, okay, because I think there's been some very good discussion here. And I think that I would add to that, I would suggest that we consider adding a D5 that is charging the governance committee with establishing or recommending a process for whatever, handling,
I'll second that motion.
okay?
I agree. I think that's a good one. Thank you, Richard.
So add D5 to quote, lead a process to establish a process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can I have a straw vote on that? 10 to agree, 10 to disagree? Okay, great. Great. Yes, Danielle.
Could we make code of conduct its own section and not buried under
Okay.
board role of
Instead of burying this item, change the heading to board ethics and code of conduct. Change the heading to board ethics and code of conduct. 10 to agree, 10 to disagree?
Can we just make it?
Wordsmith that come up with something good.
Yes.
All right, but a new heading, standalone, its own heading.
Danielle?
Two for two tonight, Danielle.
You're on a roll tonight.
2 for 2, that's not bad. Now, I'm going to shift this. This is the big issue. And Ken, let me ask you to start from a friendly amendment standpoint. I mean, where do you think this group is now? Where do you think the consensus is around composition of this committee, assignment of board members to this committee?
I think there is a split. One side is comfortable with the left side proposition. The other half is concerned about the left side composition. I suggested, I think, and I suspect many would understand my feeling about it. That's the way I've seen it in most corporations. And sometimes it includes a past president, a past, that there are some variations. But in seeing the concerns, look, I'm very open to the composition being different. The governance committee just seemed to make sense to leverage the officers. Okay. But I totally respect what people were saying. That's.
So are you open to
Absolutely.
the right-hand side as an exact alternative? President VP, one district, one at-large, CEO and treasurer's voice without code. Are you open to that?
Where that came from? Where did that come from?
That comes out of the amendment as substitute. The amendment to substitute.
No, that's my work.
Well, it doesn't matter who wrote it or didn't write it. It is in the language of the amendment to substitute per your July.
The only I believe in the concept. I get it, but how does one select the at-large? Who of the at-large are we selecting?
So,
And which district are we
Right.
selecting? How do we choose those
let
individuals?
me paraphrase a little bit, but the intention here, I think, is to then spread
I
the
agree with that.
BPC similarly.
Yeah.
So you would spread the officers, so in this case, maybe it's the secretary and, the secretary heads up the BPC, in theory. And again, how many at-large directors are there in the room? Four. So you would have, at least one here and
then how many?
one on the BPC and some on the fiduciary, et cetera, and then that's the intention, I think.
I'm very comfortable with it. Again, just trying to make sure that if we have a number of at-large or a number of district who are candidates for that, who makes that selection?
Okay, who makes the selection?
Jeff versus Mike versus.
The board, and the position rotates over time.
Okay.
Who makes that decision currently? Who determines who's on the BGC?
The president.
The president. Okay, so that's a secondary issue to this.
Yes.
Who the composition? Rachel, comment?
A comment. One of the concerns is not only the composition of the governance board, but the relative composition of the governance board compared to the board planning commission. I will pass around a table which looks at a worst possible scenario of how that might work out. And I'll describe it verbally, briefly as I can. There could be a circumstance where the board planning committee would consist of the president, vice president, and 3 board members. There would be a governance committee that would consist of the president, the vice president, the secretary, the treasurer, and the chief executive officer. Effectively, you could have anywhere from 3 to 6 members of the board who are not members of either one under that proposed structure. That effectively disenfranchises a significant amount of the board as a whole from the 2 most effective committees. That is not in the best interest of the board. That does not democratize the board activities. And my 3 fundamental concerns and principles are described as I wrote in here, and my concerns in terms of board membership I've included in here as well.
Great. Other comments? Go ahead, John.
Rachel, in that regard, I would comment that board members have never been enfranchised in the first place. Really can't disenfranchise. There's no action being taken by this committee. So it doesn't require a vote of everyone because we're not doing it. We're not taking any action. It does make some sense to have the board officers. Although, personally, I think if you have an individual who is not an elected director in office, they shouldn't have a vote. My personal view. But apart from that, it does make some kind of sense for governance to be those whom you have selected to govern. The slate of the officers, the ones you voted for.
Okay, additional comments? And again, part of this gets to that spread the workload, Richard, that you raised earlier. So, Kate, go ahead.
One point of clarification that I want to make when you think about the officers and wherever you put them. There are 2 officers, the president and the role of vice president, who are elected, who must be elected by the members. Let me qualify this. To be in the officer of president or vice president, you can only be in those slots if you're an elected director to the board. So that means you're elected by the members of the association to sit on the board. Once on the board, amongst the board members, the president, vice president can be selected. The other qualification is currently, the way we have in our governing documents, is that the offices of secretary and treasurer need not be elected members of the board of directors. They can be citizens of the community. You may have a scenario, who knows when, where both of those positions, secretary and treasurer, are in fact elected members. So the only thing that I pay attention to on the second one is if that treasurer happens to be an elected director, you're taking away their vote. So I wasn't sure what the thought process was behind that. I might eliminate that just in case your treasurer at some point in time is a director of the board of directors of the board. Sorry, repetitive. Just wanted
So
clarification.
the technicality is any officer that has the vote in the boardroom would also have a vote in a committee.
That makes sense.
That may be how you rationalize that.
I understand that.
Additional comments? Let me start on my right and go around. So Danielle?
Just a discussion. I don't understand why the CEO would not have a vote. I understand about when it comes time to evaluating their performance and their compensation and that they would excuse themselves. But I would believe that the CEO would be most familiar with the operations and how things really work. So why would we take away the vote just to look good?
Because they have a vested interest in the outcome of the actions of the board. So they should not vote.
Do they vote now?
No. Yes, the CEO is a voting member of the legal committee.
That's the only.
It's an officer of the corporation,
Okay.
but not a direct.
So they don't have vote now except for the legal committee.
And on the proposal before us, they would have a vote on this committee.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm,
see any hands, I'll go to Jeff.
I'm gonna be probably radical here, and I'll put on my courage armor. I don't know that it is not appropriate for the president who's selected by the board members to be able to put their leadership team in place. If we have all voted, and which means that we trust his judgment or her judgment in leaving us and organizing the resources of the board to effectively assign committee chairs, do these things, I don't know why we wouldn't trust him or her with making these assignments, including the governance board. Because we've already said that, hey, we trust you, we trust your judgment, we want you to be our leader.
Right.
Let's kind of give them the flexibility to lead and exert that leadership.
Richard?
Yeah, I think I agree with Jeff in principle, but I think that it would be good. There's nothing that prevents the resignation from saying that the board president would populate the governance committee with one member, with one director who's an at-large director, one who's a district director, that there should be minimal duplication across the BPC and the governance committee, in other words, some guidelines, and then make the appointments, just like the president makes all the other appointments outside of the board officers. The president and his methodology varies from year to year, or her methodology varies from year to year, but they choose the board liaisons, they choose who the board committee members are going to be, and I think that's, I don't have any, from time to time I've had a problem with the selections, but that's beside the point.
But they're still accountable to us at an election.
Right, so let me just clarify. Jeff and Richard, you're suggesting that we don't need to define the composition of this committee, that it would be left up to...
Oh, no, I'm suggesting that we don't need to be specific, okay, but that we can say that that there will be 6 members or 7 members or 2 members, whatever it is, okay, and that one of the members should, at least one of the members should be an at-large director, one of the members should be a district director, whatever, and there should be a minimal duplication between the BPC and the board and the governance committee.
Okay, over here, Eve.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when it's the president you voted for, you're happy about stuff, and when it's not, you're not, and that's just the way it goes. And so you shoot for the next year. I mean, I think that the president does all the assignments now, and I think that they try hard to, to be pretty balanced about it.
And if we go back to the discussion, 4 or 5 hours ago, whatever, when we were talking about skills assessments, I mean, every year we're asked, where do you think that you want to participate? Right. Somebody says, I want to be on the BPC and the governance committee. Well, the chances of you being on both may not be very good.
Let me start with Rachel and go around to my right. So Rachel.
We've had 2 descriptions of the powers that are already accrued, either by virtue of the deed or other reasons, to the president and to the board. He has an extraordinary set of responsibilities and power in the board already. And this is not about individuals, this is about the institution. Why in the world would we as a board give that individual, that position, even greater power and diminish the power of the board as a whole? Why not share that responsibility and make it more democratic? It seems completely wrong-headed to me that we would accrue a greater amount of power in a single individual when we have 9 people on the board who could share those responsibilities, and because we're elected at large or at districts, more effectively represent those individuals who elected us. We elected a president. We were elected by thousands of people. We should be reflecting the view and the needs of those thousands of individuals who voted for us, not just within the confines of us 9.
Okay. Other comments, Danielle? Additional comments?
I like the right side.
Okay. Eve, additional comments?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think non-board members makes any sense at all. There's just too much, yeah.
Michael?
I'm somewhere in between here. I think that several principles. Number one, I think that we need to spread the work. You know, we're volunteers, lots of responsibilities, and we've got to spread the work and responsibilities and the benefits associated with it. I think that clearly we elected the president and really defer to the president to provide the leadership. We've given him the confidence. Certainly we were elected in our own positions, but knowing our peers on the board, we made that decision. But I think it would be useful to have guidelines that they might consider. And some of the guidelines are, you know, to spread the work. And we're not going to look at, once we approve this structure, this isn't going to be looked at for 5 years or 10 years or whatever. And so a lot of focus and attention, and I think having this discussion is helpful. And I'd like to see some of that wisdom, if you want, codified. And so rather than not make any changes, I'm proposing that we provide some basic principles that would govern how the Board Operations Committee and the Governance Committee would be populated. And ultimately leave it to the leadership of the president to make the decision.
Already using the new terminology.
Wow, I
Board official vote. Congratulations. Ellen?
To me, there seems to be such a high level of distrust.
Absolutely.
And that really, really bothers me. Because I think we're all here for the same reason, believe it or not. We're all ethical. Getting back to what Lucinda was saying about if I've been cited for some violation and I'm on the board, well, I would recuse myself. I would not be involved in that vote. I'm an ethical person. I think most of the people around this board are ethical. And it just bothers me with this high level of distrust that I sense on this board.
Okay. Ken? I'm going to keep going around the table. And then
I'm very comfortable with right side. And I have to remind people, I might ask the bad Ken in the room to just reiterate what our responsibilities are. Well, we're both bad in many contexts, Ken, so I think I share your burden.
It's evil, not
yes. But would you please remind the board, as a corporation, our responsibilities to both the corporation and to the membership and the differences. I think it needs to be a reminder. Come from
a couple of things. One, just to make it clear, the president is also elected. Exactly. So they've also been elected to the board.
Right.
The thousands of people behind them. You all, as a group, have the ability to remove any of the officers at any time if you feel that they are not living up to what your expectations are or not doing the job you feel they ought to be doing. You have the right to remove. Your job, once you're elected by state law, is that you all, individually and collectively, are responsible for conducting the affairs of the association in good faith and in the best interest of the corporation, not the members. Your responsibility, first and foremost, is not the members, because there are times when the interests of the members conflict with the association. Your job is to the association. If you feel that you have to go out for an increase in the assessment, a special assessment, whatever it is, because the association needs it, that's your responsibility. The membership may not agree with that, may not like the fact that you're going into their pocketbooks. And I certainly can understand that. But your first obligation and duty of loyalty is to the entity, not to the members. Your job is to make sure that this association is run and the decisions that you make are in good faith and in the best interest of the corporation. That's by law.
That's why
Duty
we're
of
in
care,
insurance.
duty of loyalty, duty of obedience. I'm going to keep going around the table. John? No, come back to Rachel.
I saw this as another, although I take Ellen's point about the distrust issue. This is a very neat solution. It seems to be in search of a problem. There's a lot of work in these committees, and so when I heard about leveling it off, that sounded like a good idea. Kind of spread out the work.
Right.
There's really no power
Right,
in any of these
exactly.
committees.
You're right.
And that's why I'm desperate to have the treasurer as a non-voting member because I'm tired of going to these damn things. And I don't want to hold up the quorum.
Right.
There is nothing but work in these committees.
Thank you.
And it's tedious, and quite honestly, it's monotonous.
And time consuming.
It's important, so we do it. Unfortunately, there's just no power there. So I do hear that there's a lot of concern about what the committees might do. It's my observation that they don't do anything bad.
This will be part of the prospect orientation for new board members. Richard?
Yeah, I think I pretty much said that I think that I'm comfortable with the president choosing the participants with some guidelines. And, you know, I also like the idea that was thrown out, kind of a side remark, that it would be nice to see the past president as a member of this committee with one problem. Past president may not be interested. So I don't think that you can prescribe that the past president participate, but I think that if you have the option, if the president has the option to appoint a non-board member, then that gives them a non-elected board member. That gives the president the option of appointing a non-elected board secretary or a non-elected board treasurer or a non-elected past board president. I mean, and I think that that flexibility makes sense.
Lucinda?
I trust you guys. And I try to reach out and work with everybody. I just want to let everyone know that. The people who are on the board planning committee right now think that it's democratic and disenfranchised. But the way that it currently is right now, if the treasurer was elected and also a board member, we would have 5 board members on the board planning committee, and those 5 board members could dominate the vote. Basically, if they're developing agendas during this committee and not talking with the other 4 board members, then when they come to the board meeting and there's 5 of them, they get the vote. And so it's not democratic if you're leaving out those 4 other members from the conversation and developing any type of proposals. Those also, they set the agenda for the board meetings. So if a non-member of the board planning committee comes to the planning committee and says, I would like to make this proposal, they can just turn them down. So basically, the president selects who's on the board planning committee, and those are the 5 people that he has to work with, and the other 4 are disenfranchised. That's the way it currently is. Now, by changing it and moving to having 2 committees that are governing and setting agendas and developing the proposals makes it even more disenfranchising and less democratic.
Jeff? And you can pass.
I'm trying to take that all in. Because I think as as a natural part of democratic processes, you have coalitions form, and people with like ideas are going to have like ideas, and if people with like ideas are a majority of the board, well, those like ideas are going to move forward. So but I understand what you're saying. We want to try to be as inclusive as possible. That being said, I still feel that, you know, when I think about who I want to elect as president, I'm hoping that they're going to be considering all of these things, balancing. They're going to be looking at the balance of the workload, looking at the talents of the people that we have available. Do we have reasonable representation of, you know, at-large members of the? I'm betting that, I'm hoping anyway, that that person is thinking about those things. Because when you start being so prescriptive, there are probably scenarios in which we're going to have mixed matches that are going to be forced. And we're going to end up with bad decisions because we're prescribing certain types of people have to be in certain types of committees. And I don't think you can always anticipate the unintended outcomes of that. Again, with the changing of the people that we have on the board, the different skills and talents that they bring, I think giving the president maximum flexibility to make those appointments, I don't have a problem giving them to him because he is still accountable to me. And if I think he's screwing it up, I vote him out next time.
I'm going to keep going around the table. Modern Family is wrapping up, and the new show Blackish, you got to watch it. I hope you think about it. Blackish is on in 12 minutes. Yes.
The right-hand side of the slide there, which was what's contained in the proposal that I made, it's meant to be flexible. I had a very short period of time to respond to the proposal that was before the board. So all I'm asking for is diversity that does not just include the officers. First point. Second point, I absolutely want to put to rest, this is the second time I've heard it, this discussion about mistrust. This is not about mistrust. These are decisions we will make, and they will affect people. None of these people may be in the room in the future. It's not about distrust of any individual here. It is about setting an institution that will provide for the greatest degree of fairness in the process. We have 3 branches of government at the federal level, the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. Is that because they distrust each other? Well, yes, they do.
Yeah.
But however, that is the point was to establish a balance. My point here, which is very general and is not that we don't have to be tied to the specifics of the membership, is that we have balance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Danielle?
Rachel, would one suggestion be to have on the right-hand side, president, VP, then 2 members elected by the board? And then, you know, so it's not like one district, one at large. So just to add more flexibility.
But you could even add more members in one as you open the conversation with.
Just not all the officers,
right.
Excluding the.
That's why just leave it up to the president.
I would just leave it to the president.
Eve?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Danielle, I'm sorry.
I don't think it was given to us, just leave it to the president. It was given this.
Yeah, I'm opening the third way.
The third way, okay.
Currently, well, 2 things. One is I believe that there is mistrust. I believe there's a feeling of I mean, you know, all the discussion around meetings that I'm not included in, or I don't know, you know, that is about distrust. That's what it is. I mean, you're afraid that things are happening that you're excluded from. I mean, I'm sure that things are happening that I'm excluded from, and I actually don't care. But only because I am too busy, right? But so I mean, that is distrust, and you know and I harbor some of it myself, I must say. But I think all of the committees, all of the committee assignments, I think I would go with Jeff's idea. Just let it be as flexible as possible, because, you know, maybe Richard's going to be president and Rachel's going to be secretary, or, you know, or whatever, and they're going to need X, Y, and Z in that committee to do the work that they need to do.
So let me try to paraphrase Jeff. I think, what was your proposal. But another comment, Kate, first?
One of the things that I've definitely heard, and I think you've heard it too, is that it's the whole concept of breaking it up, not having all the officers, but not necessarily being really prescriptive, because we might not know who wants to go where, knowing what their skill sets are. So.
And I'll summarize that in just a second.
Okay, and one of the things that I was thinking of is split the officers up. Have 2 in one, 2 in the other, separate. They're not on the same one. So let's just hypothetically say you've got governance with the secretary and the VP, and then 2 other directors. Don't name whether they're at large or district. And then with the BPC, do president, treasurer, and 2 other directors. Don't name necessarily where they go, but that way it's prescribing, but
Balance.
wait until you see. And right, you wait till you see who comes on, who's interested in what. Because that's part of the whole appointment process now, is finding out who's interested in what, who wants to go where, knowing that not all 9 people can sit on both, right? I mean, that's the thing that we all understand. Just sorry, I just thought I'd get that.
Legal advice, and then I'll come back to the table.
Bruce, in my previous sermon, I neglected to say that I still have the same issue with regard to the non-board members being on a board governance committee.
Yeah. Okay. So no one has been really selling that hard. So let's stay. Let me try to summarize, and then Richard, let me come to your comment, and then over here, Michael, to your comment. Jeff, from your perspective, tell me if I'm right or wrong suggesting your alternative, which may be a compromise. One is president assigns with guidelines. Those guidelines are A, spread the work, B, minimize duplication among committees, C, ask directors their interest, D, more than just officers on any one committee. I mean, those are the guidelines that I've heard so far. If you want to be as prescriptive as Kate was suggesting, to say that at least a minimum of 2 non-officers should serve on all 3 committees, that would be an additional, requirement. Again, allowing the flexibility with the district or at large. I mean, it may depend upon everyone's interest and what their skills are. And so let me have you think about that, and let me shift back, Richard, to your comment, and Michael.
No, I'm first, because we're going around this.
Okay. Michael?
Sorry.
Your comment first.
You're no longer in charge.
I think that, again, some basic principles or guidelines that the president might, I think, limiting it to numbers. Frankly, I am not so concerned about having an outside individual on the governance committee.
Okay.
But I think, too, that there should be some basic criteria associated with it. But I really think that we need to give the president a great deal of discretion as to how he wants to apply it at a particular time. To Rachel's point, we're putting in place the governance that's going to guide this organization until somebody decides that they want to revisit it again. So I think we should try to do the best that we can. And I would frankly like to see this completed, during this cycle, rather than carrying it on again.
So you're adding a board members only on BPC and governance. Yep. You're adding that as another criteria.
Yeah. Correct.
But giving the president flexibility.
Yeah.
So you're speaking against anything as specific as Kate was suggesting. Richard?
Okay, so listening to the conversation, I agree that it should be president's choice. I agree that there should be some guidelines for the president in selecting. I believe the president and the CEO should be ex officio members of both with no voting power. And I think that those committees should be comprised only of elected directors. I am open to the president having an option to designate a non-elected member to the committee if he or she sees fit. That way, if the president thinks that the ex-president of the association might make a contribution to one of the committees, that option exists. That way, if the president thinks that a non-elected secretary might make a contribution, fine. But quite honestly, I think that we should be real careful. I'm in favor, I like the idea, the concept of non-board members, but I think it's very important that we understand that we're trusting a significant portion of the decision-making. And my distinguished colleague to my right is absolutely right. There are scenarios, and I have seen those scenarios executed over the years, where decisions are made by the BPC or the Planning and Evaluation Committee or similar operations, and the board was simply asked to rubber stamp what they had already decided. So I'd like to see, to sum it all up, I'd like to see new language presented to us in a proposed resolution that embodies what we've been talking about. Rather than say right or left.
Okay. Ken, I would suggest that we work on two resolutions. One has to do with the charges to the governance committee, and the other has to do with almost a broader definition of the president's authority to assign, because it really crosses not just the governance committee, but the other two committees. Sure. And we have all of your notes, that have taken down, but it's really hard with all of this input for me to synthesize it, instantly. But let me give a straw vote. I mean, earlier, it seems like a majority of you, not 100%, but a majority of you are leaning towards the president assigning all committee members with guidelines that will be approved at a future date. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Giving the president the flexibility to assign, okay?
With approval by the board?
Excuse me?
With approval by the board?
Well, that would be a secondary case, but that's not the flexibility that's being talked about by the majority of the green cards, is that the president assigns. Now there are two ways for you to be involved as a whole board. One, Ken's already described to you, which is the board can remove any officer, can remove any committee member, I assume, under the same auspices. The second thing is that you can have a ratification clause. So there are situations where the president is asked to assign and the board, quote, ratifies the assignments. So that would be one of those stopgap. If you thought all hell was breaking loose, you'd jump in and vote against ratification. But mostly ratification would be positive, I bet, throughout. So Ken, do you want to add some ratification clause or not? Sure.
I think we've
so
already gone.
Let's assume, go ahead, yes.
So we already have board resolution on committee assignments that the board does. So it's easy, it can easily be amended to include some of the things that we'll discuss tonight with the concept of a ratification clause, which I don't think is a bad idea.
I don't either.
Okay, great. So we're going to have two separate amendments come back to you. One is the original governance committee responsibilities, and the second is the assignment to committees. But in general, president assigns with board-approved guidelines. Full board ratifies the selection process. Tend to agree, tend to disagree. Okay? I think we've covered, Ken, pretty much everything in the original amendment. Rachel, I think we covered everything that you added very thoughtfully in terms of your amendment to substitute throughout. So not necessarily needing to get into more discussion about culture trust at this time. I would turn the meeting back to you.
First of all, Bruce, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And hopefully TiVo is working for you and many of us, but also I want to thank the board for going through this process this evening, and for those that remained this evening, thank you very much for being a part of this evening's event. And for those watching, hopefully you've gotten something out of it. But I think what I want, again, the initial thought process here with regard to governance was to focus on getting us, the board, focused on strategic visioning. I wanted us to focus, as I said, on the what's and the whys, and to let the staff and the CEO focus on the who, the how, the when, and at what cost. I wanted us to have monitoring policies put in place that allows us to measure success properly with the CEO and staff. Allow them to know what they're being measured against and know that there's a measure that can be interpreted so we can all talk to each other on the same wavelength. I wanted to reduce board and staff conflict. I wanted to align the Reston Association resources with operational priorities. I wanted to, very importantly, improve relationship and accountability with our members by defining expectations for performance of both the staff, but most importantly, the board. That was the whole intent of us coming about many, many months back in all of these sessions, including Bruce's assistance, to get us where this is. And I must say, there was, and I'm speaking personally, there was no personal agenda. This was purely on the benefit. My mission since I've joined the board has been to be more transparent and get the rest of the community. This has been my mantra since day one. I love seeing the same faces in the room. I want to see new faces here and there. And that's 80% of the people who do not vote, do not care, do not want to participate, because they see the status quo of what we have been doing for the last 40 years, and in particular the last 2 decades. That's why I got involved 6 years ago. It has to stop. So that's why I wanted to put better governance in place. So that's where we're at. Hopefully we can take this forward, make it something that we can implement and believe in, but most importantly, something that the future boards and those people in the 80 percentile that want to participate but don't want to really will have a second thought. That's really why I'm doing this. Nothing more. That's my agenda. And I'm serious about it. That's why I quiver a little bit. I'm deadly serious about it. So, but thank you, everybody. It's been a long night. We went a little over. Bruce, thank you for keeping on his agenda as much as possible. I think it was a very good discussion. Richard?
I just have one question. We have a board action plan for 2014. Nice document, gives us a lot of things to do. But I want to call everybody's attention to page 14, where we see a sample board calendar. And I want to call everybody's attention to July, which says annual board retreat at the beach. All in favor?
There's a green card. One member is allowed to join.
What about the Christmas party?
Thank you, everybody. Any other discussions? Otherwise, I'll let everybody break out and get on with their night. See everybody tomorrow night, bright and early.
There are trees left over.
Please bring them. Staff will always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good job.
Appreciate it.
Great job.